All right, I think we're ready to get started. Everybody who's entering, I would love for you to just comment where you're joining us from. Here on the panel, we have Spain, the United States, and Canada represented. So I know this is going to be a very international chat, but I love to see in the chat where people are coming from. So we have San Diego, we have Canada already, the Bay Area, South America, Texas. This is great. Keep these coming. And then I'll go ahead and just introduce this chat now. Oh, we have people from Paris coming in. Awesome. Did you know that 90% of the global population will need new skills by 2030? And that 12 million career transitions will happen by then. We are in the midst of what is called a skills-based revolution. And in case you don't know what that is, it's a shift in the way we work and how we hire, who we hire, and the way that we run our organizations. So instead of focusing on roles and functions, the focus is on each employee's unique set of capabilities. This shift, of course, leads to innovation, but it also leads to higher performing teams and more engaged employees, which is especially important given those stats that I shared earlier. So before we dive in, my question to you is your team ready for the skills-based revolution? Do you have the tools and techniques you need to hire, develop, and engage talent to meet the demands of the future of work? Chew on that a little bit. I'm excited to get into this conversation and learn a bit more. But before we get started, let's do some housekeeping. So here we're just showing the Power to Fly code of conduct so that we can all be sure to have a great conversation. So if you haven't already, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're from. Turn your camera on. You don't have to, but it's really great to have this conversation and see folks' faces. We will keep your microphones off for the duration of the chat, but we'd love for you to put any questions that you have for the panelists in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as possible throughout. And then next, if you are a member of SHRM, here is your code to get credit for today's event. I'll pause here for a second so you can take a screenshot in case you need it. Awesome. All right, and then I just wanted to quickly tell you all a little bit more about us at Power to Fly. At Power to Fly, we help organizations reach, recruit, and retain highly qualified, diverse talent. And one of the ways we do that is through expert-led events like this one, where folks can they can build their network and connect with people and companies that care. And then one last shout out before we get started. I wanted to say a huge thank you, to our amazing partner, Think Human, who helped make this session possible. Think Human is dedicated to rallying individuals, electrifying cultures, and delivering breakthrough performances. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to quickly introduce each of the panelists, and then I'll also have them introduce themselves afterwards. So first we have Jared. He is an L&D professional with 15 years of experience building and leading high-impact leadership development workforce. Ooh, high impact. Oh my goodness, I know how to read. Building and leading high-impact leadership development, workforce development, and corporate training programs. He currently leads leading experience design at Critical Mass, an award-winning full-service digital experience design agency. Then next we have Anna Vernier, and she is the founder and CEO at SkillCrush. But before founding SkillCrush over 10 years ago, she ran a web design and development company that built sites for media clients such as the New York Times, ProPublica, the Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and MTV. She's been named one of the 20 women to watch in media by the Columbia Journalism Review and one of the 30 most important women in tech by Business Insider. And then lastly, we have Sienna J. Brown, who is the head of growth at Power to Fly. Her mission is to build a new wave of leadership focused on inclusion and intention in the workplace so that every individual has an equal opportunity to reach their full potential. Her thought leadership around topics related to inclusion, leadership, and cross-cultural understanding has been highlighted in NPR, CNN, TEDx, Insider, USA Today, and more. And I'm Mara. I'm the learning experience manager at Power to Fly, and I'm your host today. And I'm really excited to get started with these conversations. So I'd like to jump us off with having each of you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you're working on upskilling professionals. Let's get started with you, Sienna.
Absolutely. First of all, welcome. It's lovely to see you all here today. Excited to see some faces, and we just want to encourage you all to fully engage in this chat. Moderator hat is on. A little bit about me. So thank you for the bio, Mara. When we're thinking about upskilling professionals, to be honest, it's been a very core part of my career over the last decade. So not just learning about how are we upskilling professionals, centering the professional development of diverse professionals as well, but also how are we tying that to bigger impact within the organizations that they're in to really be able to help towards career development and growth. So specifically right now, as head of growth at Power to Fly, I lead an amazing team, Mara included, where we're really focusing on creating not just content, but also courses and really learning pathways to be able to center how are individuals able to learn the people and the business skills that they need to grow as emerging leaders and middle managers so that they can thrive and not just have the skills that they need, but have those skills also be seen and celebrated in the workplace as well.
Anna, do you want to go next?
If I unmute myself, yes. Hello. So my name is Autumn Bernier, as was previously stated. My focus has been in workforce training, but specifically for people who are looking to transition. So I think very relevant to this conversation, but the context is a little bit different than what you all are probably dealing with in terms of working with a workforce within a company. So I was sort of working with a workforce that was looking to change companies. So predominantly people who are going from non-technical to technical, which is very relevant at this moment in time, as everyone knows. And then in addition to that, I also sat on the workforce development board for the city of New York, which gave me a lot of really interesting insight into sort of these macro trends of upskilling and sort of skills issues related to a lot of different populations and a lot of different industries. The focus in New York is predominantly on healthcare and tech. Those are the two biggest industries in New York outside of tourism. And then we have a lot of sort of immigrant populations and the like that we've worked that, sort of fell into the purview of the Workforce Development Board. So anyways, a little bit of, I feel like I know a lot about technical upskilling of people looking to make a career transition and a little bit about a lot of different populations. So hopefully I'll have something to share of value to everyone here. Also based in Queens, New York. I saw somebody else was here. So I'm waving to you.
All right, and Jared, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Jared Andros. I, as Mara mentioned, work for a company called Critical Mass. We're a full-service digital experience design agency in the marketing world. We're headquartered in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I think I saw somebody in the chat is also from Alberta, so great to see you. But we are a global organization. So we have offices, several offices in the US. We have offices in South America, London, Tokyo. I'm probably even forgetting a few. My primary focus here is leading the leadership development and learning experience design aspects of our L&D team. So we have a whole leadership development program for anyone who leads people in the organization. This year, I launched two brand new programs. One focused on BIPOC emerging leaders and helping them sort of excel and grow within their careers, and another on intergenerational mentorship. Now I'm turning my attention a lot to AI, which I know we're going to talk about throughout this session. And I'm also a member of the DE&I board. I do have a bit in common with the other panelists here today. I used to work in a corporate training background at the University of Calgary, and there we did a lot of learning consulting, providing courses and programs to different businesses across industries, and also ran, similar to Ada, an upskilling program that was meant to help people who had been laid off from the oil and gas industry, which is kind of our main industry here, into tech roles. So yeah, that's kind of a few of the things that I've got my eye on currently.
All right. Thank you so much, team, for introducing yourself. We've got a super qualified and awesome panel here. So if you have any questions at all for these folks, please feel free to leave them in the chat. I'm going to dive into some questions that were pre-submitted by the folks who registered. So at the top of this talk, I mentioned that 90% of the global population will need new skills by 2030. Given this statistic, what do you see as the top upskilling needs across both technical and non-technical skills? I'd love to hear from all of you here, but Jared, why don't you start this one off?
Sure, thanks, Mara. So I think the obvious answer is AI. That's kind of the buzzword of 2024. And I know that we're going to get more into that in a bit more detail. But for us, a lot of the more technical stuff that we're looking at we have a number of different proprietary tools here. So things to help our strategists understand the audience, for example, different research tools, also tools to create digital marketing assets. So those are a lot of what we are focused on currently in terms of technical skills. Also things like getting a lot of requests right now for change management and conflict resolution from different teams. And then from the more non-technical side, which is really my kind of area of expertise, those are really anything in the leadership development space. So doing a lot of programming right now on emotional intelligence, how to have difficult conversations, giving effective feedback, stress management, and then a variety of DE&I topics.
Nice. Anybody else? Sienna?
Yeah, I'll hop in. So plus one to everything that Jared said, and I think something that we often think about when we think about technical skills might be things like AI, coding, etc. But I also just want to give a reminder that technical skills can also mean whatever someone needs to be able to do their job well, no matter what that role is, right? And so when I'm thinking a little bit about what are some of the technical upskilling needs, in addition to what Jared was saying, thinking about data literacy and analysis, right? How are individuals able to not just look at data, analyze data, but then also create a story around that data as well to be able to gain buy-in from other collaborators that they have in the company. And then I won't talk as much on AI and automation proficiency because I know Ada and Jared definitely can, but I think another big process of that is how are we centering automation proficiency using AI as well to be able to help people go further faster? So really thinking about how are individuals integrating that into their role, especially if they're working in a remote or asynchronous environment. And then just overall, I think digital adaptability, right? So with all of the evolutions that we're seeing, how are we really being able to teach our teams how to go through some of that change management, like what Jared mentioned, in regard to the organizational perspective, but then also in regards to all of the emerging technology. And then in addition to the people and business skills, plus one on emotional intelligence and change management. And I think some really core parts of that is really being able to prepare our employees to feel empowered in change as well. So how are they just not waiting for change management from leaders, but almost sparking and really igniting change management within their roles? And the last thing that I would just say is really thinking about effective communication and collaboration through a global lens. And so I didn't mention this. I'm originally from New York. I see you all. But I've been living in Spain for the last 10 years, and something that I've really centered into my practices, both in diversity and inclusion, but then also in just general remote work, is how are we able to communicate and collaborate across cultures, but then also across different identities and personalities as well. So in regard to the people and business skills and the technical skills, that's a little bit of my perspective. And I'll pass it over to Ada.
I think I got so focused on what Sienna was saying that I forgot the actual question. The original question was about what sort of our focus
what
is
are
on
the
in
top
terms of
upskilling needs across both technical and non-technical skills?
Yeah, so we focus exclusively on technical skills. I will say where we do end up teaching a lot of non-technical skills is actually in the job search portion. So we do a part after we train our students in the technical skills, and the technical skills are really focused on predominantly on software development, and of course have an AI component at this point. And we can get more into this, but for our purposes, there's sort of 3 levels of AI. There's using AI tools, there's building with AI. So that would be sort of integrating, large language models and other models into your software applications. And then the third one is actually building models yourself. So we do the top 2 in our program. And then where we deal with, a lot of social and emotional skills work or stuff that's more softer skills is actually in the job search, because a lot of our students are mid to late career in their original career and looking to now transition. And so they're going to be entry level in a different career. And many of them haven't job searched in a really long time. And they certainly haven't job searched for this role ever before. And the job market has changed enormously. And the dynamics there are really, they're hard for anyone to follow, much less somebody who hasn't, done it in a long time. So there's a lot around interviewing, best practices, resume, just that whole sort of process of getting a new job that is constantly in flux. So I think there's a lot of work there.
Yeah, it sounds like there are tons of skills that are on the horizon, and I know AI came up a ton, but of course, those non-technical sort of people skills are also super important. But before we get there, I do want to talk a little bit about AI. In both in the technical and communications kind of sector, will it be necessary for individuals to be, what kind of skills will be necessary for individuals to be prepared for the ongoing AI revolution? So it's a similar question, but I want to know specifically, Ada, I don't know if you can take this one, but kind of going deeper, like not talking just about what type of AI skills, but what type of communication skills, what types of people skills are going to be necessary
in the new world of AI. Yeah, I'd also really love to hear from the audience if you guys can just put in chat sort of where you all are at with AI. Since, I think one of the challenges about AI is that AI is like, it's like an unbelievable, it's like an umbrella that encompasses the entire world, right? So there's just so many different parts of it. And I think it both is having this profound impact, and I think also it's not really that big of a change. You know what I mean? It's kind of it's all together in the mix. So I think like the first thing is really obvious, but I think that just understanding the terminology is actually like a huge unlock. And I think a lot of us don't, I think a lot of terms in AI get thrown around, and like I struggle to keep up with all the different terms. I was at a conference last week, and I literally had this running note. I was watching the chief product officers at Anthropic and OpenAI do a fireside chat, and I just had a running list of all the lingo they were using, which was clearly lingo that they're really accustomed to in their little Silicon Valley AI bubble. But even me, as somebody who like teaches how, I teach students how to integrate LLMs into and build generative AI web apps, hadn't heard these terms before. So I think that there's an enormous amount of terminology. I also think it's a very sort of like lingo slang-based world, which tech is in general, and that's a challenge, but like AI seems to be that on hyper mode. And also it seems like the language is changing really quickly. So I think this in and of itself is one of the biggest sort of barriers to sort of knowing which direction is up when it comes to AI related things. And then I think, right, there's like, again, like when we think about it, we think, and I'm sure Sienna would have like a lot more nuance, and, Jared too, maybe in terms of like dividing kind of the different layers that I discussed, right? The different layers in my head are, AI tooling. So ways in which non-technical people or technical people can leverage AI tools, which is, there's an explosion of right now, to make their jobs more efficient and get, be faster and ideally better at their jobs. So that's one layer. The second layer is how to really leverage AI within your software applications. So, a simple example of this would be like a really good, and I think, that could be a technical thing if you're a software developer, but I think even other people can start to think about these things like, oh, I work in customer support. Wouldn't it be great if we had a chat bot that wasn't just a tool that we bought, but like actually that we could train on some data and could really work in our specific context? So starting to think a little deeper about how to integrate the tools and make sure that really start to think about the capability of AI within your system. And then the last one is like actually sort of building your own artificial intelligence. So this would be training a model to do something very specific and unique in your specific situation. So those are kind of the ways I think about it. But I think even within the first, there's like a whole universe, right, in that first layer of how AI tools that are becoming available and coming onto the market can be leveraged. So
I love this. And I'll just piggyback off of what Ada was sharing and less from the technical lens. I love this. I'm like, we have to have a debrief afterwards. But less on the technical lens and more so, let's say that you don't work in the tech sphere, right? But you're just trying to use or integrate it within your team. I think something that we've seen be really impactful in that we actually created a course around is like inclusive AI usage, right? Because again, it's a learning model. So how are you also being able to integrate either through your prompts or as they're starting to learn and work with you, how to try to center inclusivity as much as possible. And I mean, there's tons of studies on why this is so important, but I would say that really as you're getting started with your journey as well, being able to have the model learn and work with you on how to be inclusive to different types of learning styles, how to use inclusive language. For example, the other day, we were doing an exercise in regards to creating an ideal audience, and we were training it how not to be biased and who that individual should be. And so kind of working with some of your knowledge and expertise in that interaction. And the other thing, just like as a tactical takeaway for some of us who are watching right now, start having these conversations within your teams, right? Earlier in our team meeting this last week, we were like, let's all have a collaboration where we talk about the different ways that we use AI in our everyday life and work, and being able to have some more of those collaborations, because I think for each of us, we might have an individual use case of when and or how we use it, but having some of that cross collaborative learning within your team is an upskilling opportunity, wink, wink, as well as a collective learning opportunity as well to really start integrating that and learning from the other individuals that we work with on how they're using that in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I fully agree with everything that's been said so far. Great perspectives, both. Ada, I really agree with the way you describe the different layers, and understanding what people actually need from the AI to do their jobs better. And then Sienna also kind of unpacking like what are some ways that folks can properly use these tools. So I think that it's very important to break up the groups of staff into how they're using the tools first. So, for example, some things that we're looking at rolling out right now are some general use cases. How are people across the organization using these things? Are they using Midjourney maybe to ideate some images, or are they fixing up their writing using ChatGPT, different tools like that? And how does that translate into client work? What are we actually able to use AI for in a public client-facing setting versus what needs to be? I know here there's a really big conversation about like you can use it to ideate, but you can't always use it for the final product. So helping people to understand where those guidelines sit. And then also, we need to make sure that our recruiters, for example, understand and can speak confidently about how people across the organization are using AI. Similarly, with our business development folks, they need to be able to speak to that as well. So there's a lot of different segments. One of the things that we recently did, we like to pilot a lot of stuff on our talent team to see how it lands before we roll it out to the larger organization. And I ran a session on AI. And one of the things that I realized from that session is that even if people are saying that they're using AI tools, they might not be using them in the most effective manner. So I did a very basic intro to prompting in ChatGPT, and I was surprised at how few people had seen anything on how to write effective prompts before that. And this was only a couple of months ago. So one of the activities that I ran in that session was a virtual whiteboard where I asked people what they're using the tools for currently, as well as what they would like to be able to use them for. And part two that we're going to be doing soon is we've actually researched how to do some of the things that they wanted to do. So people were asking about like, can I summarize a meeting using AI with action items and different things? Really fairly basic stuff. Can I create templated emails? Different things like that. So part two will be rolling out some of that stuff.
Great. And I think that this is really important because we're touching on, the skills that are necessary. And I know, Sienna, you touched on sort of the leadership aspect of this all. And I imagine that a lot of the people who have joined this session are leaders or are interested in becoming leaders. And so I'd like to hear more about how folks can assess skill gaps within their team and then align learning strategies with business goals. Sienna, could you take this one or get started?
I love this. I am saying I love this because this is the bread and butter of what we've really been focusing on at Power to Fly over the last year, really. And I think before I dive into it, I think again, just another call to action is that oftentimes when we think about skill gaps, we don't actually properly identify the skills that people do have because we're so focused on that growth and trying to bridge the gap. And so when we're thinking about skill gaps and how to align those to business goals, the first thing that I would say is actually identifying and understanding the skills and strengths that currently exist on every individual in your team, right? Some of the workshops and things that I like to do with our team is like, what is your zone of genius? So not just what are the skills and strengths that you have, but also how and when are you working your best and creating the best thing that will be able to drive your work and the rest of the team's work forward. And then when thinking about skill gaps assessments, I would be remiss if I did not shout out Mara, who has been an amazing leader in this work that we've been doing, but really being able to understand on the technical, on the people, and the business skills, what are the skills that individuals have, and then where do they need to be growing for their own career development? And then also in regards to how do we then tie that to what's needed within the organization. And so personally, I view teams as puzzles, beautifully complicated puzzles where all of the different individuals on your team should be complementing one another and then also being able to fit in those skill gaps. So I think the last part that most leaders overlook is, yes, you can look at skill gaps and identifying skills on an individual level, but then being able to take a step back from a more holistic level and saying, how do all of these skills and or opportunities for skills come together? So that might also even mean, let's say that I'm going to choose folks in the room. Heather might be amazing at data-driven storytelling, and Dwayne might be fantastic at analyzing the data beforehand. How can we match these two individuals together so they can also learn collaboratively from one another? And then when we're thinking about how we then tie that to business needs, right? Career growth is great. Everyone wants to grow in their career, but we have KPIs that we need to be hitting or OKRs. The first thing that I would say is really being very clear on defining both those organizational goals and those departmental goals, right? What are we all working towards and how are we all working towards that collectively? And then really being able to customize learning pathways. I don't have the actual data, which is fine, but there's a really important study that talked about a lot of organizations actually have learning and development opportunities, but the talent within those organizations aren't satisfied with those opportunities. So really quickly, how many of you have attended a training that you weren't actually excited about? Or someone in your organization made you take a course that didn't actually interest your needs, right? And so thinking about how when you're creating learning pathways, tying that to what the organizational goals are, tying that to what individuals' career development look like, and then also creating opportunities that really foster a culture of continuous learning, right? So making sure that the upskilling initiatives that you're doing doesn't feel like another checkbox or something that individuals have to do, but instead you're tying that to how their work is contributing to the bigger picture and giving value to the new skills that they're looking to learn as well.
Jared, I'm also interested in hearing your perspective here.
Yeah, I was about to unmute actually because Sienna gave me a lot to think about there. I think, first of all, loved the team as a puzzle metaphor there. I think that is also sort of how I think about it. And that made me also think since we're talking about how we assess skills gaps as leaders and then align the learning strategies to those. Um, for more non-technical side of things, one of the things that I do as part of my work here is I call it kind of consulting, like L&D consulting, where leaders across the organization will come with a problem and say something like, oh, my team's having a lot of trouble collaborating effectively. That can mean a lot of things, right? It's not always, okay, well, let's give them a course on collaboration and that's going to solve the problem. Um, so what I like to do to unpack some of those needs is to really do an in-depth needs elicitation. And that usually looks like an interview type session with one or more leaders to unpack kind of what it is they're actually looking for. So what you might find if someone's asking for collaboration is actually there's some issues communicating effectively. Maybe they're not documenting the needs. Maybe there's no follow-up procedure. Maybe there's no processes at all for coming to any kind of conclusions and moving the work forward. Maybe it's something completely different. So what we find from those sessions is that sometimes the need can be met by one of our off-the-shelf courses that we have from our kind of internal developed catalog. Other times we might need to bring something in externally, or sometimes it's as simple as having someone from L&D or another credible leader in the organization facilitate some kind of session where you might ask the folks like, okay, where are we today? Where do we want to go in the future? And then identify and land on some ways that people can agree on to actually get there. The other thing that I find, and one reason that I love facilitating, is that often once you start delivering training for a group, you'll see that new needs start to emerge. So you might have one part of your session that doesn't get a lot of participation usually, but with this particular group, you're getting the most participation you've ever seen. Maybe that's something you can dig into deeper. So yeah, I think that it's always critical to listen to your leaders and what they're asking for, but the caveat being they may not always know what they're looking for, or they may not be able to articulate that in the same way that we might as L&D professionals. So it always does pay to spend a bit of time probing with some deeper questions to make sure that you've accurately understood that need before you just kind of throw a training at it.
Yeah, I think that's super important, kind of getting a gauge on what folks want and what folks need. I wanted to stay along those same lines, and I selfishly want to bring this up because it's about Power Up. Power Up is a virtual learning platform, and the thought is that the virtual resources, while they are convenient, it can be harder to keep people engaged. So I'd love for all of us to chime in, but we can start with Sienna. Could you share any strategies that you found effective for keeping users motivated and engaged in the learning process in a virtual setting?
Yeah, absolutely. And just for a little bit of context for those who are watching, so Power Up is our online learning development platform that we have here at Power to Fly that really helps individuals tune into the people and the business skills that they need so that they can upskill as an emerging leader or a middle manager in their organization. And of course, when we're thinking about who those individuals are, we're short on time. There's a lot that has to happen in every single day. There's a lot of different opportunities to learn as well, whether that's using courses, whether that's engaging in content in your Feedly or whatever that might be. And so 3 of the things that we really focus on, the first thing is short and digestible content, right? Do we all have time to spend an hour during our day every day to learn new skills? Maybe not, but how can you break that down into something that's 5 minutes or 10 minutes to really be able to not just learn the new content, but I go back to like 7th grade comprehension as well. How are we actually understanding what it is that we're learning about? And then also applying it. So again, not just having it be like scrolling through Instagram or TikTok or your social media or LinkedIn, whatever it is, and consuming a lot of content, but really being able to say, how are you learning a specific aspect of a wider skill, being able to learn that, comprehend that, and then apply that. The second thing that I would just say as well is that everything that we do is through the lens of inclusion. So really being conscious around inclusive learning styles. You might be more of a visual learner. You might be someone who comprehends things better with text. You might need questions afterwards to really be able to make sure that you're understanding what that is. And so really being able to offer a variety of a range of formats, from everything like Excel templates to PDFs to videos to text, really helps, in addition to as well obviously having closed captioning so that as people are going through, they're really able to understand. And the last thing that I would say is centering engagement. So with Power Up, we have all of our courses led by subject matter experts, but then also how are you tailoring that language to also make the things that individuals are learning easy to access, right? I'm going back to thinking about what Ada had said. If we have to create a laundry list of all of the different terminologies of what we're trying to learn, it makes it that much harder, right? And so like, how are we able to take complex ideas, and this can be anything from going back to you, Heather, right? Like data-driven storytelling to cross-cultural communication to middle manager leadership and development to negotiation skills in the workplace, which seem very broad, but making that easy to understand. What are all of the different aspects of that? And how are you able to take complex ideas and make them engaging through speaking the language of the individuals who you're trying to reach and you're trying to help support? So short, digestible content, inclusive learning styles, and then also engagement and accessibility through the language that's being used to be able to really connect with other individuals.
Ada, was there anything else that you wanted to share?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about how, and I'm interested too to hear Jared's take on this, but I think, so we are an online learning platform, but what I have learned is that sort of self-directed learning is very, very low likelihood to, to succeed, right? And so, it's interesting because at Skill Crush, the student, opts into the program themselves. And so I've often thought like we have a carrot, but not a stick, right? So I don't have any mechanism by which to sort of really put the squeeze on them to do their homework, because it's really just about them being self-motivated. And the way that we have made progress in these realms is by layering in a fair amount of human contact, right? So we have the ability, we have, a community that's really robust. They meet with instructors, they can meet with coaches, and that is really fundamental to our success. But what I was thinking about a lot with what Sienna was saying with like micro learning, and sort of thinking through this idea, it's like bite-sized learning, micro learning, it's so valuable, but the trick is connecting the person to the learning at the moment that they need it. And how do we do that? And I don't have any answers. That's an open question. I want to hear other people tell me what they are thinking.
There's got to be an AI tool for that somewhere, but I don't know what it is.
I think it is an opportunity though, right? For anyone in any sort of leadership position. Obviously a tough one, but that's kind of what leaders do, right? Managers.
Yeah, definitely. I would just sort of add on a few things to what's already been discussed. I think it maybe almost sounds a little too obvious, but it's worth repeating. At the beginning of a session, you can ask people why they're there, what it is they're hoping to get out of the session. And then as you go through the content or the discussions, point to each of those items that will help people feel a bit more bought in to what they're doing. I find here, as Sienna mentioned, calendars are busy. It's hard to get even an hour of people's time. So a few ways we work around that is by sending out things like pre-reads or videos that they can watch before they come to the session to sort of supplement the material. Micro-learning, that's come up a few times. I think in terms of engaging people, most of what I run are actual live sessions, instructor-led, by different experts within our organization. And so we try to do a lot of like breakout rooms, group discussions, virtual whiteboards, allow people who have different learning styles or different levels of comfort with speaking in front of a group to still participate. Using tools like that, you can use chats, polls. And one thing that I thought was kind of interesting that we rolled out last year, we actually assigned or we attached an assignment to one of our DE&I courses. And the idea was that they had to actually action some of what they had learned back on their team and then report back to us on how that went, kind of have you noticed any difference? Are people bought into the DE&I work that we've been doing? And that gave us some really interesting data that we were able to report back to the organizational leadership on this is what we've done to actually action DE&I throughout the organization. So that was not every workplace is going to thrive off assignments, and it was a bit of an uphill battle here, but it's something that you could certainly try.
Yeah, and I think that the assignment thing is a double-edged sword. Sienna, I know you know what I'm talking about, but yeah, I'm gonna just pass it to you to share kind of how that assigning folks courses or learning materials, as you said, could be totally unaligned and cause rejection, but it could also be successful.
Yeah, and I mean, yes, sorry, yes, and plus one to what Jared had said in regards to alignment, it actually made me think about this is really aligned with what we do within Power Up of like everything that you learn, you then have to go and implement it. And I think Mara, going to your question, it goes back to what we had all kind of spoke about as well. How do we make it matter, right? And so going back off of what Jared was sharing, what I was thinking as well is like, how are we also positioning what people and individuals are learning and tying that to their development, tying that to making their job, the work that they're doing, even better. And I think it's also a common challenge that comes up when implementing large scale upskilling, reskilling programs as well. And so a great example actually is so at Power to Fly, in addition to online, oh my goodness, my brain is speaking out. Sorry. In addition to online development, we also host not in person, but like live trainings as well. And something that we've seen and really being able to do large scale reskilling programs with one of the clients that we've worked with. We've worked with over 50 in doing live trainings. They actually had their entire organization go through training and upskilling programs and over a variety of time and years. And it actually led to them getting an award for being one of the best places with belonging at work, right? But some of the things that we were just sharing and talking about is like, how are we also thinking back to the change management? So thinking about, Jared, what you were saying as well, right, is like, how are we able to integrate things that are going to be able to help elevate individuals' work, but then also preemptively as an organization thinking about how are we looking at change management and potential resistance to change, right? How are we being able to look at this through a lens of not saying, okay, you might already be overworked or you have a lot on your plate, here's one more thing to do. And so I think, again, really tying that to the goal of this is to be able to make your life, your job, your impact even easier. And so I think, again, like with some of the things that both Jared, Ada, and myself were sharing before is really being able to say, how are you tying this work to not make it feel like work, but to make it feel as if it's an integral part of how we're investing in your development, going back to the question of individual career development and growth and those organizational goals. So really in that messaging that you had, and I loved what was shared before of like, why does this matter to you right now? Because then that also gives us data as leaders to be able to understand what some of their intrinsic motivation is, and even being able, I'm nerding out for a second, but like being able to look at that in the long scale to even see engagement and how people are integrating if the reasons why they're interested in starting or the impact that they're seeing can actually really help in the long term.
Totally. I want to grab some questions from the chat. Somebody said, our company's L&D plan is very broad, yet criminally underutilized. What have you seen work to motivate employees to take advantage of upskilling opportunities? And then I'm just going to tack on here what are some best practices for upskilling reluctant learners? I think they kind of go hand in hand. Does anybody want to answer that one?
Jared, I feel like more of the expert here, but I was just going to say that something that comes up for me in this discussion of like what's in it for me is also bridging the gap sometimes between what's in it for me and like you don't know what you need to know. Like we definitely struggle with that at Skill Crush sometimes. People would be like there's one class, and if anyone is a technical person, nobody wants to take the GitHub class. And we're constantly struggling to explain to people that literally if they only took one class, that's the class they should take. That's how fundamental it is to working in tech, that skill. But yeah, that's, you know what I mean? So if people have, especially if it's sort of like a very big goal that they have and they really don't know how to get there, and that's part of the reason why they have engaged with you, how do you bring those people along through every step of the learning journey? It's an actual question, Jared. How do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to know a bit more about that question. Like, I think that these things can be a bit different in different industries. For example, I know that here you offer something and people jump right on it. Usually, they're very eager for career growth and opportunities. I think that you may want to look at how you're communicating your L&D offerings, and see if you can make them feel a little bit more exciting or valuable for folks. That could be one thing to look at.
Great. And I'm seeing another question in the chat that goes, oh, it aligns with one of the other pre-submitted questions, and it's how do you bridge the gap between our personal skills learning and growing a business? And the pre-submitted one is like, how do we ensure that we as leaders keep up with our skills as well as those on our team and the folks that we're hiring? Sienna, do you want to take this one?
Yeah. I don't know why I nerd out and get excited about questions like this, but I think, especially for all of us who are leaders, whether either leaders or emerging leaders, right? And I also want to demystify that you can also lead within an organization, even if it's not aligned with your title, right? And I think a big part of that is also teaching by example. So if you're giving your team courses that they need to be taking, are you taking those same courses? Are you able to hop in and be in that discussion with them? Or is it more something that you're mandating individuals to do? And I think something else that's really important and personal core value of mine is like time and energy management. How are we being strategic and recognizing that part of our roles, again, not just as leaders, but as employees and individuals who are investing in our personal and professional development, blocking out time. That might be 90 minutes every Friday. That might be 30 minutes at the beginning of your day to head to Power Up and look in the news section to be able to figure out what are the industry leads, right? I'm using my own personal use cases, whatever that might be. But the other thing that I would also say is that having conversations around this growth and also showing up through a lens of transparency and ownership in your role as well. And so that can be something like in every team meeting or bi-weekly in team meetings, what's something interesting that we all learned over the last couple of weeks? What are the resources that you're currently nerding out over right now? What are some of the courses that you might be taking? And I think another part of that, and I'll just use a real life example, I'm putting my team on blast today, but we were having our team meeting earlier this week and we were talking about actually all of us going through our own skills analysis and audit as a team. And I asked them, I was like, okay, how deep do we want to go? 1.0, 2.0, or 3.0? And recognizing that we have a lot of competing priorities. We're coming towards the end of the year. We have big goals that we want to reach. But like what Jared was saying, communicating the importance of the learning or of the skill development, and then also having it be a conversation. And like, I was surprised everyone voted 3.0. They wanted to really dive in deep into this new learning opportunity. And so by creating those conversations and then also by holding that sentiment of responsibility and ownership as leaders, we have it seem like we're all rowing in the same boat or we're all on the same yacht heading to where we're heading together, but not having it feel as if it's something that's disconnected, where it's a mandate, right? But instead, again, really tying that to how we're all able to evolve within the workplace and in our careers as well.
Yeah, and I also think a huge part of this whole thing of preparing your team for the future of work, ensuring that we're all going towards the same goals and that we're qualified and our teams are engaged to reach these goals. It starts with hiring, and I know some folks have mentioned in the chat skills-based hiring. And with our last 10 minutes, I'd love to kind of dive into that topic. So we had a pre-submitted questions that kind of dives into the DEI aspect of skills. How can organizations effectively assess and integrate skills-based hiring practices while ensuring that diversity, equity, and inclusion are prioritized in that process? Jared, did you want to start off with this one?
Um, I'm not super focused on hiring personally, but one thing that I did help to design a couple of years back was interview training for all of our anyone who's involved in the interview process, hiring managers, recruiters. And a big thing that we focused on there was how to make the interview process equitable. So, things that might seem basic to anyone who's in recruiting, but making sure that you're asking every candidate the same questions, making sure that you're documenting those answers and scoring them appropriately using a standardized rubric. Also, we have a little bit on unconscious bias in that session as well. I don't know if that's a great answer for that question, but I'll pass it
It's a
over.
good start. I'd like to hear from everybody, so take it away. Ada, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I guess two things come to mind for me. First, I will say that the benefit of the tech industry is that I think maybe as opposed to other, or I will say technical roles, is as opposed to other positions, the skills tend to be a little bit more, I guess, because there are these technical skills, they're a little bit easier to represent, to communicate, and to assess. And that's actually something that, like in our program, we were able to really leverage in this, in the pursuit of greater equity, because the population we're working with is underrepresented talent who is looking to transition into technical roles. And we were able to really leverage the ability to very clearly communicate and demonstrate their technical skills as a way to sort of overcome issues that otherwise tend to systemically sort of weed a lot of underrepresented talent out around education and experience, basically. And so in a lot of ways, I guess the promise of skills-based assessment is that it in and of itself can hopefully mitigate some of that bias. But I think obviously it's all about the implementation. And, as in terms of this question of how to make sure that it doesn't maybe introduce new types of bias, a lot of this just has to do with sort of, review and data reporting and identifying what, the bias that the system sort of does or does not introduce.
I love this. And I mean, I'll round this out. I think it's super interesting because outside of my head of growth hat, I previously ran our DEIB department in the organization, and a lot of the work that we did was also working with other organizations, similarly to what Jared was saying of how are you going through the hiring process, mitigating bias and through a lens of inclusivity. And I just want to be honest. No, raise your hand if you want to be called out and realize or recognize that you're biased. No one, but we all have our biases, right? And so I think this also goes back to the change. I was going to go into an exercise, but I'm going to take my L&D hat off. But the change management process, right? So when we're thinking about how are you integrating inclusive hiring? Some things that we've seen really work is number one, as you're leading individuals through that process, whether it's through live programming or whether it's through on demand or whether it's through training is fine, but how are you actually implementing? Similarly to what Ada said, revising all of your hiring processes and rubrics to make sure that it's mitigating bias. Learning how to identify transferable skills where someone, let's say, might be a project manager with 6 years of experience, but they're looking to move into a customer success manager role. How are you able to, whether it's through using AI, going through training or whatnot, recognize the skills as well? So again, just another tactical step if any of you are thinking about or going through those hiring processes to bring back to your team, starting to recognize what are some of the transferable skills that might be in different roles in the roles that we're hiring for, right? And so I think there are a lot of really small ways, but something else that I think can be really impactful is how are you integrating certain types of questions that focus on skills as well? Because I know we're talking about a skills-based revolution, and in all revolutions, there are different iterations to how we get to the ideal state. And so right now, if we are saying, I'm gonna hire the person who went to my university, or I know someone who knows someone, it'll take a lot of work to be able to say, what are the strategic steps that we need to take as an organization? How are we aligning that to our mission, our vision, our values, our culture? And how are we also integrating again in ways, which is often a conundrum that we run into, of recognizing that there is bias in all of our processes, but doing it through a lens of how are we growing and evolving together versus saying, oh, we're doing bad as a company because the way that we've worked for the last 20 years isn't going to work for the next 20. So I think, again, as leaders and as individuals who are moving down or towards that idea of becoming more inclusive and moving towards skill-based hiring, is recognizing that where's your organization right now and what is that first next step that you all can take to be able to move forward into what that ideal state is.
Yeah, and this whole process takes time. So have patience, give yourself grace throughout this process. And yeah, it's a one thing at a time sort of situation. We're actually rounding out the hour. So I wanted to ask everybody who's here, what is one thing that you have taken away from this conversation? And then I'd like to ask each of our panelists the same thing. What is one thing that you would like folks to take away from this conversation? Ada, do you want to get started?
I'm like, no. I mean, one thing I'm taking away from this conversation is just reflecting on how to meet the learner where they are when they need it, and thinking about the dynamics of internal motivation versus external motivation, and just how complex those are, especially with adult learners. I mean, I think they're complex anyways, but I was saying no to what's one thing you want people to take away from this conversation. I think, yeah, I guess maybe it's the same thing, right? Which is just understanding that this is really complex psychology that we're all having to navigate as we, are living in this world of ever evolving work with ever evolving skills. And, the three of us who have been speaking have, work on these challenges on a daily basis, but I think everybody works with these challenges to some degree. I think it's just part of working in the world at this point, especially in jobs that have any sort of technology function. And by that, I mean, you're on a Zoom and on a computer. So yeah.
I can go next. I think for me, and I share this with my team all the time, especially the more junior folks, is that working in L&D or HR, talent in general, is a very privileged place to be. You get access to a lot of the inner workings of the organization and of teams and of psychology. And if you come to that with an open mind, always learning and trying to get the best out of people, I think that you can have a very rewarding and fun in a lot of ways career. So I think just don't lose that excitement if you can.
I love that. I have goosebumps. I'll wrap us up because I know that we only have 1 minute left. I would say one thing that I want you all to take away from this conversation is recognizing just how much power you might have by taking the first step, right? So similarly to what we were talking about in regards to learning, taking what you all are dropping in the chat, sparking a conversation with your teams, figuring out what this looks like for you in your own career development, and really being able to say and identify what is the right, not the right next step, but what is one step that you can take or commit to in the month of November. I'm giving y'all homework and assessment in the month of November to really start thinking or integrating upskilling and skills and how just important they are into your team, your organization, or even your own role.
All right, folks. Well, we're at time. Feel free to take a screenshot of this key takeaway slide. I feel like we've gotten into some really great conversation. So thank you so much. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. And Maya left all of our LinkedIns in the chat. And I am going to pass it over to the next talk. And I think Zara is going to be the host, or maybe not. I don't know.
Yes, no, you are correct, Mara. Thank you so much. And thanks to the previous session hosts and panelists as well. Welcome, everyone. Excited to move us along to the next session here, which is focused on innovating and elevating and really leaning into how do we rebrand DEIB and continue to elevate diverse talent in uncertain times. So hello, everyone. My name is Zara Chaudhary. I'm the DEIB Senior Manager at Power to Fly. Very excited about today's conversation. And so we're just going to go through some quick ground rules before we dive into the session. So just wanted to share our code of conduct here for you all, just so we can make sure that we're here and we're engaged and we're having a great conversation. If you haven't already, feel free to drop into the chat an introduction. And then also feel free to have your camera on. You don't have to, but it's always lovely to see people's faces. So feel free to also turn your cameras on. We will be keeping your microphones off just so we don't have any background noise, but feel free to put questions in the chat, or if there's anything that's really resonating with you in the chat, feel free to drop that in there as well as we're moving along in this session. Also, a friendly reminder that you are eligible for SHRM credits here. So this is the code to get credit for this session. I'll just pause here for a second in case folks want to screenshot this so that you have the code for later. So I'll hold us here for just 5 more seconds so that you can screenshot it if you need to. Right, and I'll move us along. So this session is being hosted by Power to Fly. Just wanted to tell you a little bit more about us here. So our mission is to fast track economic equity by upskilling and connecting underrepresented talent to roles in companies that care. We move that mission forward by helping organizations attract, hire, retain, and develop top diverse talent and providing opportunities for diverse talent to grow in their career. I encourage you to check us out more offline if you haven't heard of us before and this is your first time joining one of our sessions. So welcome to everyone. I'm going to move us along to actual introductions of our panelists. I'm very, very excited about this. So our first panelist here is Ra Goddess, who uses she, her pronouns. She is the author and founder and CEO at Move the Crowd and co-CEO and founder at N Formation. So she is the entrepreneurial soul coach behind hundreds of breakthrough changemakers, cultural visionaries, and social entrepreneurs, from New York Times bestsellers to multi-million-dollar social enterprises. As CEO of Move the Crowd, Ra is galvanizing a movement of 3 million entrepreneurs dedicated to reimagining work as a vehicle for creative expression, financial freedom, and societal transformation. Welcome, Ra. Our next panelist is Jaquise Brown Gravely, who also uses she, her pronouns. She is the senior leader of client EDI programs at Cielo Talent. She's a seasoned global diversity leader with a proven track record in talent acquisition and workplace inclusion. Her entrepreneurial spirit and dedication to diversity initiatives have led to a successful career spanning 7 years as the global leader of diversity programs at Cielo. In this role, she has developed and implemented strategic diversity programs across various industries, from healthcare to home improvement. Thank you for being here with us, Jacquees. Welcome. And our final panelist with us here today is Milena Berry, who uses she, her pronouns and is the co-founder and CEO at Power to Fly. Prior to co-founding Power to Fly, Milena has contributed to numerous startups and had a blast being the CTO of Avaz.org, where she oversaw the technology to support growth to over 30 million members. Milena is a frequent commentator on how companies can diversify their teams, especially in tech. Her work for Power to Fly has been recognized in Business Insider, and she was named Fast Company's most creative people in business in 2015. Welcome, Milena. So now that we have an idea of who our panelists are, this is going to be a wonderful discussion. We have a series of questions that we'll be diving into, but I do encourage folks to also drop things in the chat again, if there's specific questions that you want to ask, and or if something really resonates with you and you want to drop a comment in the chat. It's always nice to see folks engaging there as well. So feel free to introduce yourself and share your thoughts as we move through this session. So to my lovely panelists, my first question for us here is that the conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging has never been more intense, especially in the wake of the Supreme Court's landmark affirmative action ruling and the ensuing conservative backlash. Some companies, like Lowe's and Best Buy, are pulling back on their DEIB initiatives. Given the recent shifts in DEIB strategies across companies, how do you see the role of DEIB evolving over the next few years, especially in light of social and political challenges? So I'll open it up to the group, and whoever feels ready to hop on, please turn your mic on.
Okay, fine. I'll speak first. I try to sit back normally, but hi everybody. I'm Milena. It has been we're celebrating our 10th year of impact this year at Power to Fly. So gotta say it feels amazing to have so much to celebrate that we've done in the last 10 years. And it's also been fascinating to watch our space evolve over a 10-year period. And we've seen highs and we've seen lows. We've seen focus on women. We've seen focus on Black Lives Matter. We've seen divestment in DEI. We've seen it all, it feels like. And I know our journey will still continue. I guess the one thing I want to say is that I would love for companies to not just be reactive to the sensationalism of the news industry. And I would like them to actually think deeply into what is their exposure really, right? And I think that definitely varies by company. If you're a Fortune 100 company, you probably have a larger exposure to some of these, suits that are starting. And by the way, it's like primarily one activist from the right that is causing all this, like legal damage, so to say. But I think the companies really need to take a moment, not be reactive, and actually audit their practices and most importantly, risk levels. There's a ton of business activities that we all do that come together with relevant risk profiles, but we still do them because they're the right thing for our business. And just like DEI practices is the right thing for our business, if we're operating in a higher risk environment, we just have to take a moment and make sure that we're compliant. And first of all, so evaluate your risk. If you're a Fortune 100 company, you're going to have a much larger risk than if you're a small company. And then reevaluate your strategy based on that. For some companies, it might just be stay the course. And we have data to share later on in this presentation, which shows that the majority of our points of contact in the DI space are more committed than ever to stay the course. And for others with more exposure, they might need to adjust practices, language, etc. Shameless plug-in. Anytime you need expert help, you can come to Power to Fly and ask us for that help. We're here for you. But that's kind of what I wanted to kick off this conversation by kind of that thought process of like, it's not one size fits all. You actually have to customize your approach based on where you are and what's your journey as a company.
You know what, Melina, I absolutely agree with what you said. What I'm seeing with a lot of the clients that we interact with is that most folks are staying the course, right? And so there is a lot of noise out there around DEIB, around diversity, and how people are moving forward. But what we're seeing, if it's ingrained in your business and your culture, then it's there, right? It's still there. It's not going away. I actually believe, and what we have been seeing with a lot of our clients is that the conversation has matured. And it is more so not a, can you help us define diversity, or can you help us justify a budget for it, or why? You know, those are no longer the conversations. It's more so it's expected within the overall business strategy. And so I do understand that there are a few that media has significantly communicated that there's all of these changes happening, but the data clearly shows that that's just not the case. You know, companies are still being steady and moving forward. I do believe that as the political climate begins to settle, whether no matter which way the election goes, I think that will absolutely reveal where some organizations are within their commitments, right? If it was genuine and a part of the fabric of who they are, or if it was performative. So I think a lot of those things will continue to reveal itself as time goes by. But what we are seeing is that people are pretty much staying the course and have already understood that it is a part of their business strategy and it's needed.
Yeah, I want to build on that. Jacques, thank you so much for that statement, because I think this question is we should all be asking ourselves is really what's at the heart of the work of DEI, whatever we call it, right? Like, let's just take the labels, the language, the acronyms off the table and ask ourselves, what do we think the heart of this work is? And I think the heart of this work is about creating a system of work and a culture of work where all people who are contributing can thrive. And if we really kind of come to that as a true north, then I think we get to ask those more specific questions about where are the opportunities and challenges that exist within the terrain of our respective and collective organizations, right? And I do think, you know, Milena, I thank you so much for saying that, because I think that people being thrown into a space of fear, people being thrown into a space of reaction, right, in the context of the climate and the context of also traditional strategies, are never going to pan out in ways that are going to be forwarding. In other words, if we're always operating and reacting and coming from a place of fear, we're never going to actually have the opportunity to really get to what the heart of the matter is. And so I think the practice for us is to really be able to quiet the noise and ask those deeper questions of ourselves and our organizations and our leadership. That's really about what's the heart of the mission here, what's the heart of the commitment here, as we look at our teams, as we look at our structures, and how do we stay true to that?
Thank you all for those very interesting answers to kind of get the ball rolling about how we're really thinking about DEIB, right? Regardless of what term, as you mentioned, what phrase, what terminology we might be using for it, how are we making sure that not only is it personalized to the company and where the company actually is, but how are we also not feeding into kind of like what media is telling us, right? About sort of like the fear mongering when it comes around DEIB, and how do we really stay the course? So I love just kind of kicking the session off with naming some of these things that are happening, right? Especially around DEI in today's world. So let's keep that centered as we kind of continue the conversation. And again, thank you to folks that are kind of dropping their thoughts and questions in the chat. We will hopefully be able to get to some of those later on in today's session. So interestingly, right, despite kind of some of the media noise around what's happening with DEI and DEI budgets and all of that, despite some prominent pullback in some areas, Power to Fly's 2024 survey from earlier this year actually revealed a surprising trend. 57% of executives are actually planning to increase their DEIB investments, while only 8% are scaling back. Why do you think the media narrative around DEIB investment is so negative when the realities are very different? And I know that we were just starting this kind of in the previous question. Would love to continue building on that. And also, what are you hearing from executives about why they might be continuing to invest in DEIB? So, Jacques, I'm actually going to kick it over to you to start us off on this question.
Yeah, you know what? It's really interesting how much I can't remember the exact data that it was that talked about how fear and crisis gets people to realize and read content more so than, unfortunately, sometimes the positive data, right? And there is when there's so much change happening in our world at one time, there is a lot of unknowns. And I think when people have that sense of not sure of what's going to take place, people start to fall into that fear category, right? And sometimes it's easier to embrace that. The way that we have a large campaign going on around Quiet the Chaos, right? The way that you deal with that is to truly hone in on what are the facts. What's the true data that's out there? Is your employee culture healthy right now? Are they doing well? Do you see them progressing and continuing to flourish and to move forward? What is working within your organizations? Do you see the right collaboration? Do you see innovative thoughts and progress coming out of the projects that are taking place, right? And so the proof is in the data. And if we allow the data to be king, and if we continue to keep our ear and our voice to our employee base, our leaders, and understand what's taking place, then I think that helps to balance out a lot of the things that are happening in the media. And it's just unfortunate. I know there's so many things that are happening again in the world that is causing some movement that make people feel very uncertain. So I get the angst, right? So I think a lot of times that's played off of, but all the time, it's always easy to hopefully balance that out by having strong data.
Well, I want to go next.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that the also the complement of the data is just all of the ways in which you keep your ear to the ground by talking to people, by actually pressing the flesh, lovingly pressing the flesh of your collaborators and partners in the context of your teams and your organizational structures at every level, if you can, right? Because the truth is that the need for more advancing cultures is just not going away. The need to develop leaders for 21st century opportunities and challenges is not going away. The need for more humane work environments is not going away, regardless of what the media says. And I think the practice for us is, in pressing the flesh, you get those nuanced distinctions, right? The things that maybe don't make their way onto the surveys and don't make their way onto the data. And that you have the complement of the two, then you're able to really develop approaches that can be more nuanced and even more impactful in the context of the work environments that you're operating inside of. And so I think our big takeaway is going to be, how do you transform the fear? How do you transform the concern? Right? Because as Jacques said, the media's got a job to do, and that is to sell, eyeballs and ears to their outlets. But I think when we start to look at what's really necessary and pertinent for the organizations that we're contributing inside of, as much as we can get to the ear to the ground, as much as we can utilize the data as ways to sort of counteract what we're hearing or support what we're hearing, the more I think we're going to be able to develop more innovative solutions to move what we know are the day in and day out challenges forward.
Yeah. For me, just a quick response to Jacques when he said data is king. I'll say data is queen. But so definitely +3 on the concept of data. And +3 on kind of the feeling that this whole politicizing that's happening in the media is very unfortunate, because I feel like it's creating a lot more fear than then people are starting to really wonder, are they safe to keep carrying out their work? And often I talk to DEI departments that say, we don't know if come December we're going to have a job. And we kind of feel that on a day-to-day basis with our partners. And So it is an interesting point. It's a very unstable point. I think we've all been dealing with a lot of change, starting with COVID in 2020. And then just so much happening over the last few years, from social justice movements that were so overdue to, then we had the Great Resignation as a movement. Then we had like the layoffs that happened in the last 2 years, and economic instability, and tech. So it's just been a lot of change. And of course, uncertainty breeds fear, and then media is gonna, capitalize on it. I will say that it's very unfortunate, the affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court. It's very unfortunate that we have a politicized Supreme Court in this country that's doing the great work that, so many generations before us have started. And I think we can still remain optimistic that the future will be better than today. Even when we take a step back, we'll take 2 steps forward one day as well. But I do think that it was never, legal to hire somebody based on just their skin color. And I think there's kind of a big misnomer about this. All right, like the work that we're all doing in the DEI space is to make sure that everybody, that we have enough representation at all funnels, like to undo the inequities that actually lead to imbalanced hiring slates, or imbalanced slates for admission in higher education. And just side note, there's no decision by the Supreme Court that has to actually with employment practices. This was all about the higher education space, and then you kind of got translated into the fear in employment practices. So I just want to kind of anchor us to say, like, this is actually, like it's all about having the choice and being represented at this last stage of the process. And when you actually, the hiring manager is reviewing qualified and interested folks. And at that point, of course, they're going to hire the best person for the job when it has to do with an employment decision. I will say one more thing, that yes, I agree that in all of our data, it shows that when you talk to executives, they're all talking the talk still, right? They're all saying we're as committed as ever. Our commitment is not dwindling, or the majority of them are. They are talking about how they're going to change their language, how they're going to adjust some things in order to rebrand the DI efforts. And I know we'll go into more of that in the rest of this talk. But the one point I want to make is that this is not just about the right thing to do. This is also about the workforce demanding it from us as leaders. We have 80% of the workforce, 80%, this is 4 out of 5, 8 out of 10, right? People want to work in a workplace that actually prioritizes belonging in their work environment. Whatever it is the past we came from, this next generation that's in the workplace today demands it from us as leaders. No matter what we do from the top down, it's the bottom up that's going to ask it from us. And then what do you want to do? Do you want to have the best talent working for your company? Because that's how you make innovation. That's how you set yourself apart as a company. That's how you achieve business results, is through the best talent, right? We all know that. It's all about the talent that you can attract. And so if you want that, then you have to adjust your practices to meet their needs.
Yeah, I'm already like loving this conversation. I'm loving also how we're centering data, right? And so you've heard all of our panelists kind of mention how important it is for us to not only rely on the quantitative data, right? But we heard like kind of pressing the skin, right? Actually getting into more of the qualitative data as well, because quantitative can only tell us so much. And also you'd be surprised based on what media has shaped for us to believe about data versus when you actually start talking to folks at your company. And so I think it is very important to kind of understand data, dive into the data, and also be aware of where your company is when it comes to data, and not just listening to kind of the larger noise that's happening around data in general. And so I'm loving kind of like the little tidbits that are coming through from each of our panelists. We're also going to actually be diving in specifically around that hiring piece that Milena was just speaking about, that talent acquisition piece. We have a question specifically around that as well coming in a little bit. So we are going to dive into the hiring side of things as well. But we already kind of started talking about it a little bit in this previous question, and I'd love to ask my panelists to dive in a little bit more, because we know that the conversation around DEIB continues to shift. And so what are some emerging trends or challenges that you've noticed, and how can and should companies really adapt to stay ahead? And so for this question, I'm actually going to kick it to Ra first.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Zara. I think that there are three things that we're going to need to be paying attention to. And I come back to this sort of way in which we frame the context for engagement in our respective organizations. And I'm going to talk a lot, you're going to hear me say a lot about cultures of advancing. And this also comes from the data, right, where we're seeing statistics that are saying 80% of people are looking to leave their jobs in the next year, right? And I'm seeing numbers even as high as 85%. And I think, to Malena's point, I think that this has a lot to do with what Gen Z is pushing the envelope on in terms of their expectations of what companies are doing in the context and in the realm of belonging. But the three things I want to sort of put forth for you all to think about is the first is that we need a mindset shift. Like there's a way in which we've held that people and profit cannot coexist, or that people and mission and profit are at odds. And I think we're going to need to start to challenge ourselves around that and recognize that the truth of the matter is that if people, profit and mission don't learn how to work together, we're not going to make it, right? Like they're imperative that they come together and to continue to create tension or continue to operate inside of a tension that says that, I think is really going to be important to challenge. And this is, I'm speaking really about the zero-sum philosophy, right? Which also is permeating DEI and the conversations about DEI. Like, oh, if it shifts in another direction, does it now mean that these folks are not going to be taken care of? Oh, if it leans into gender, does it now mean race is less important? I mean, these are all of the kinds of things we hear, and they're rooted in a scarcity-based mentality, which we know has driven so much of the way in which our organizations have operated in the hierarchical system. So we got to start to lovingly push against that. And part of our ability to be able to push against that is to really say that the three can coexist. As a matter of fact, it's necessary that the three harmoniously coexist in order to really see thriving in the next generation, the next era of our businesses and our missions. The second thing is to look at what does it mean to be a growth-oriented company? What does it mean when we take a growth-oriented approach to how we're engaging, which means that we're willing to invest in people. We're willing to recognize that if our people get better, personally and professionally, our companies get better, our mission gets better, we've got more capacity to get the job done. And our opportunity to start to really become advocates for growth orientation. Growth orientation doesn't always mean a promotion, and sometimes it does. But all of the data that I'm seeing is that people, if you ask people why they're leaving, growth, lack of growth. The work is uninspiring, and I don't see a pathway for growth. A growth personally, growth professionally, growth in my leadership development and my skills, growth in terms of opportunities and ways to contribute. So we want to be paying attention to this across the board. What are ways in which we can be better utilizing and leveraging the full talents and gifts and perspectives of our folks? And this also ties into the diversity option as well, because for many people, retention, the biggest retention challenge, lack of advancement, lack of opportunity, lack of growth. That's what we've heard, at least across the board, consistently. The third thing that we want to be paying attention to is how we're carving out spaces for greater contribution, greater co-creation, recognizing that leadership comes from every corner and every aspect of our work. And if we start to invite our people to be more co-creative collaborators and contributors, that they actually could be bringing the solutions to the problems, so that we as the leaders don't have to think about how we solve all 150 of the issues, right? That we actually can share some of the wealth of the challenges and actually begin to empower more of our people to be problem solvers in the challenges that we face. And that these are also aspects of growth. Like, wow, how much did I get to contribute to initiatives, opportunities, right? Initiatives, strategies that actually move the needle on the mission. And that those are the kinds of ways that then people build greater investment and build deeper engagement in the organizations and the structures that they participate in. So hopefully at least that gets us started.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ra. Milena or Jacques, either of y'all can hop on the mic.
I'll just quickly notice that I've seen a lot more walk back from the word equity than equality recently. That is also very unfortunate. Obviously, we all know why equity is so important. But I've seen major organizations in the HR space, including the Society for Human Resource Managers, say that they will no longer use equity kind of when they describe that work. And I think this is really unfortunate and something that we have to defend and something that we have to stand by. But it's definitely a trend that I'm seeing. And then the other trend that I'm seeing is that people seem to, in order to use this work not as a way to be split apart, but as a way to be brought together, which I think is very important, no matter which part of the elections and social movement you're on, like, and what your belief system is. I think at the end of the day, we're all people, and all of us as people are part of the workforce. And so we want to just create cohesion. We don't want to create, being apart or splits or rifts, right? And so I think I've noticed that the word diversity is very polarizing these days because it kind of highlights how we're different. But when you talk about inclusion, then folks get less nervous because they don't feel excluded with that word. They feel included in that word. So I thought that this is kind of interesting language to notice and to keep evolving as we're trying to make sense of the world we live in.
Absolutely. So I certainly echo the same things that both Ra and Melina have just communicated. I think some of the things that I've seen more so the second half of this year as far as trends has been around a lot of merging and intersection of DEI, ED&I, or any type of diversity with ESG. I've seen that there is a lot more comfort within organizations to combine those areas and continue to progress forward. There's always been that light step of unsurety as where does DEI belong? Should it be under HR? Should it be under culture? Or where should it be? And so I am seeing that intersection in ESG quite a bit. Absolutely, the intersection of diversity, DEI, and AI is a huge trend that not just so much trend. I think AI is our hot tone right now, right? Everyone is asking, they're communicating, it's impacting. It has been around for 10, 15 years or so, right? But the evolution of it is now very much so real within our day-to-day. So seeing those intersect is what we're seeing. And I did see a question in the chat around governance, and I was loving that question. So I did try to respond to that in the chat. The other two areas are system limitations as we continue to evolve and grow. What do those systems mean? Specifically, it used to be just, in the globe, if we're looking outside of the US, all truths may not be transferable as far as how organizations define inclusion practices, right? However, with our recent laws changing here in the United States, it's almost state by state now. And so because we do have many of these legal changes happening, how do we measure? How do we monitor? How do we continue to move forward? And so people really trying to better define, I won't say come away from it. I think they're trying to understand how to define diversity within their organization so that they can communicate its successes. So those are the areas that I'm seeing as far as trends and partnering with a lot of our global clients.
Oh my gosh, so many good tidbits from each of those responses. And I just wanted to kind of elevate certain parts of what folks said. So first, growth is not the same for everyone, right? When we're thinking about what growth actually looks like for employees, not just assuming it means to move to the next position. We sometimes find that some employees are very happy in their role, but they still want to grow within their current role, right? So really evaluating when we're thinking about growth in our company, are we actually just using the same solution for everyone, or are we actually personalizing what growth means? How are we leveraging DEIB to bring people together versus dividing them? I think that's so important for us to continue to think about. It's very easy for us to, again, lean into some of the fear around DEIB, and it's become such a buzzword, right? But how are we actually using it? Because it's beautiful if we can actually leverage it properly. How are we using it to bring folks together and to continue to have these types of conversations? And then I think that point that was made around ESG, and how are we actually pulling that into the DEI conversation, right? Because again, that is yet another way for us to kind of tie it to overall company goals. And we're seeing more companies kind of moving in that direction. So is your company there, right? Is that something to kind of consider bringing back? And then the final thing I also wanted to flag was someone was just mentioning, I believe, Jacquees, it was you, around global, right? Like DEIB, and what the conversation looks and sounds like within the US is going to look very different in other parts of the world, right? Are we making sure that our DEIB conversations are adapting to where we are geographically in the world? Because it's not going to look and sound the same, right? So again, making sure that this level of personalization is happening across all these sorts of areas is going to be really important to make sure that we're having an impactful conversation. So with that, I know we're about halfway through the session, so I would love for folks to just drop in the chat. Let us know you're here. Drop your favorite emoji in the chat. Let us know you're here, you're engaged, you're listening. We have 3 powerhouse panelists kind of sharing these really great tips and wisdom. So please let us know you're here. Drop your favorite emoji in the chat. And my next question is going to go to Milena. So Milena, I would love to hear, what lessons have you learned from Power to Fly's journey in DEIB over the past decade? And how have those insights really shaped your approach to diversity in hiring and upskilling?
I can talk for hours on this. So I'm just trying to contain myself to a couple of short talking points, because certainly it's been 10 years of learning, 10 years of impact, and we're just so proud of everything we've managed to impact and with all of the work with all of our great partners. So very grateful to have been on this journey in the last 10 years. So a couple of things. I think consistency is key. Probably going to be my first learning. I think it's so important for companies to not start and stop their efforts. I think it's so important for companies to stay the course, because guess what? Folks will notice if you flip-flop, and you will lose trust as a brand. You will lose trust as an employer. You'll lose traction of all the efforts that you've already invested in. So super important to be mindful, strategic, committed, and stay the course. The flavor of the year might change of what you need to achieve. It doesn't have to always be the same, but your commitment has to kind of stay the course and to showcase to, we were even working with a company where we were putting together these courageous conversations for them. Then one year they said, don't worry about it, we're going to do it internally. And guess what? They didn't, because they got overwhelmed. And then their employees started complaining and said, like, no, we really want this. This is like, the key part to our sense of belonging here, and how we connect with each other and how we learn on a quarterly level. So that's just like one small example, but that my comment extends to all efforts, not just on upskilling, but also on employer branding and on hiring as well. And of course, you understand that companies are going to have different needs, different years. So if you're going through layoffs, you're going to be working more on your long-term employer brand. You're going to be working more on retaining the folks you already have. And then in times of growth, you're going to be focused more on talent acquisition and the levers you have within that function. But definitely consistency is key. The second thing I'll mention is that, again, call it whatever you like, but this work is about our people, right? And people are the biggest asset in our organizations. Again, they make or break our business objectives, and they're also our biggest liability. They're the biggest expense on our, P&L, on our profit and loss statements. For those of you who own your P&L, you know what I'm talking about. It's your 90% of your expense is usually people. So again, if we want to get the best out of our people, not only because it's the right thing to do, but thanks to kind of what Ra was talking about, that profit and mission actually coexist, and that's the only way to get to profit is to imbue the mission in it and to do the right thing in order to achieve better business results, right? We need to continue to invest in our people. And then the third thing I want to mention as a learning from the last 10 years is that, funnily enough, storytelling and connections are key. And we have tried to deliver the impact with Power to Fly in so many shapes and forms and business models and delivery methods and all that stuff. But what has worked best, what has been really exceptional about Power to Fly, is our events, which allow for really true connections of education and inspiration to happen between the workforce and the companies, right? And so I think it's so important to be able to tell that story. It's so important to create this vehicle to connect. And so definitely think about storytelling and connections when you're talking about how to bring the most impact with this work that we're doing.
Thank you so much, Milena. There were so many good little pieces in there for folks to kind of continue to be mindful of, but really love that friendly reminder that everything revolves around our people, right? We need to be investing in our people. We need to really make sure that everything is human-centric and revolving around those folks. And then the power of storytelling, of course, in being able to kind of build some of those connections. So I love that. I love that invitation for folks to really lean in there. Jacquees, my next question is for you. So with your expertise in talent acquisition and workplace inclusion, how do you really measure the success of DEIB initiatives in recruitment and retention, particularly for underrepresented groups?
Oh, that's a great question. So it absolutely is going to vary by organization and location. What I have seen with a lot of companies, they often come to us and they say, "Okay, tell me who's doing it great. Who's that North Star that we can just control, copy, paste, and do what they do, right?" But the areas that you are tracking when we're thinking about this royal data, which I love the conversation in the chat around data. When we think about this royal data that we have to think about system limitations, right? So if you think about talent acquisition, most companies' ATS systems were hard-coded with male-female. What happens if you have someone who identifies differently, right? Do you have the systems that allow people, one, to identify so that you can have real and clean data? Do we have fields that allow us to connect the intersectionality of diverse areas so that we are tracking beyond just gender or ethnicity or race, right? And so what are our systems limitations and capabilities, I think really does govern what we are able and how we are able to track. The other part is legal compliance, because based off of the location that you are in, the city, state, or the country, there are some questions that you may or may not be able to ask. There are some things that are or are not legal still in some countries, right? So those things come into play. And then, if you think about just what don't you see within your organization, what skill set is missing, not just who is not at the table from who doesn't look like me. Certainly that is something we need to take note of, but what skills are missing within my team? Not just somebody who would I go have coffee with or who went to my alma mater, right? But what's missing, right? So I think taking note of all of those things organizations have to get in front of to make sure that they then can say, okay, this is what we can actually track, to make sure that we are balancing out through every segment of diversity, who is missing from our organization or where we are doing well. So I think I know that was a broad answer, right? But it really does truly, it depends. And so I think the opportunity for most organizations is understanding what you can track, but then two, allowing applicants and people who are currently in your organization to say, this is how I identify.
Such a great sort of reminder for us to kind of check in with our own systems and where the kind of threshold may lie in terms of adaptability and flexibility. I think that's such an important reminder. And I also love what you said right in the beginning around, we sometimes just want to follow what other folks are doing, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for us, right? Especially if we're located somewhere else or the size of our company is different, or we might just be on a different part of our DEIB journey. And so I do think it's very important, again, back to this piece around making sure things are personalized and customized to us and where our company currently is. I also love this idea that you shared around a skill set. I like to call it like a skill set inventory, right? Like, what do we have on our team? What do we have in our company? What are we missing, right? And really being on top of that. I love that. So again, a friendly invitation to folks to really start thinking about, how you're evaluating skill sets and being mindful of that on your team in a little bit of a different way.
Absolutely. And we provide equity within our organization when we help our employees feel seen. So yes, they may have joined the organization as as a customer service representative, but after you talk to them and you find out, oh, wow, you have all of these other skills, this is outstanding. Look how we can further give you some growth within this company, as Ra was talking about, right? How do we get that stickiness or that retention that Milena mentioned? That also helps when we ask who they are, what skills do you have, or where do you want to go? And that then creates opportunities for upskilling. So
Right.
it's connected through so many areas. But yeah,
Absolutely. And it goes back to the conversation we were having around growth, right? Like, what does growth look like? And sometimes people want to grow into other roles or just grow their skill set. So really being on top of that conversation will help you be able to customize what growth actually looks like for employees. So I love that. Thank you for that little piece, Jacques. Ra, my next question is for you. As a cultural innovator and social impact strategist, how do you see the intersection of social justice and DEIB playing out in corporate settings?
Yeah, this is the loaded question, right? I mean, I think, and I dare I say, I'm going to be a little provocative here. I think we've got some work to do in terms of how we reframe this conversation. And I want to start it there because I think, unfortunately, some of what we're grappling with is when we utilize even the terminology, right? If I go back to Milena, right? If we utilize the terminology of social justice, that can be a trigger for people, right? Because there's a sort of perception about what it means in terms of who's included. It's a perception about what it means in terms of who gets to do the work. And there's a perception about what it means in terms of who benefits. And so part of our greatest challenge, and I think that this is a challenge that we have to really take on fully, is recognizing that in some of the ways in which DEIB work has been framed, it hasn't been inclusive in what role people have to play in order to really be able to support creating cultures where everyone gets to thrive. And I say this because I've sat in conversations and work with particularly white male leaders who say, I don't see that I have a role to play in this. I don't see where I have an opportunity. I feel the chastisement of it, but I don't see the opportunity to participate. I don't see an opportunity to be a part of the solution. I hear a lot about how I'm part of the problem, but I don't see an opportunity to be a part of the solution. And I think we all have work to do to ensure that in whatever way we're evolving this conversation in our respective organizations, that we are absolutely creating spaces where people can understand what the invitation is in order to be able to drive the kind of change and growth and evolution that actually we all do want to see. So I spent a lot of time talking, right, with white men about their role and about the opportunity that they have to play. And so I think we've got to think about the framing of that. I think we've got to come away from the zero-sum language. And I think we, in the context of DEIB, have also been guilty of operating inside of a scarcity model, win for one, loss for another. And I think we've got to meet that head on and really recognize and understand that any strategy that speaks to sidelining anyone is also going to be problematic within the context of our organizations and our structures. And I think when we start to look at this idea of what does it mean to move mission, what does it mean to move people, ways in which we can articulate the agenda, articulate the vision that feels more holistic, right? And I know Milena gave many buzzwords that could be utilized in terms of how people are thinking about moving into or moving away from the articulation of diversity. But I think there's a bigger conversation here to me that also connects with what Jacques said, which is, what are we measuring? How are we defining success? Beyond governance, we recognize that there are governance and regulatory issues that we are absolutely going to have to be mindful. But there are also conversations about the evolution and growth of our mission and the evolution and growth of our company and the goals that we're trying to achieve in the larger scheme of things. And so from that perspective, how are we measuring success and what do we understand about success, right? And so there are going to be places where we're going to need to be looking at how do we invite more than just the single bottom line in terms of what it is that we measure. What are the other bottom lines that we're going to start to bring to the table? And so I think for this conversation of social justice, we are going to need to look at what does it mean to reframe that in a more inclusive, dare I say, right? It's interesting, asking diversity, equity, and inclusion to be more inclusive. Here we go, right? I think we're going to need to be more inclusive in the way that we're framing and thinking about this conversation. And I think we're going to need to be really considering what are the specific roles that people can play, no matter what background, what orientation, what perspective they come from. How can they be contributors? How can they be part of the solution in terms of where it is that we want to go, right? And I think it's the quality of work. I think it's the quality of how we work. I think it's the quality of people's experiences, the way that we're engaging more aspects of who they are, which we spoke to, I think is going to be critical, right? Because if I'm not asking you the right questions, there's a whole lot about you I'm not knowing in a conversation that doesn't enable me to capitalize on all of the talent and all of the perspective, not only diversity of skill, but diversity of perspective. Because when we start to talk about the leadership and the way that we think about strategy, perspective is also going to be a crucial aspect of the way in which we think about how we win, how we go forward, how we succeed.
We love spiciness, Ra, and I love the kind of things that you really called us into, right? To be mindful of as we're doing this work, right? Like who really is included and what are the roles that people are playing. And I love this invitation that you had as well to be mindful of not just discounting folks because of their identity or their background, right? But really thinking about how do we leverage folks, right? And having people reframe their own sort of mindset when it comes to this around how can I connect with other folks? People drop some really great comments in the chat around how we can really influence other folks, especially if they're from similar backgrounds to us, right? But also around this piece that you mentioned before, Ra, as well as around the scarcity mindset and how do we shift the DEI conversation away from the scarcity mindset, which I think is really important because that's a completely different framing. And so I just want to be mindful of time. I know we have about 10 minutes left. So I'm actually just going to ask one more question and then we're going to start to kind of wrap up here. So to my lovely panelists, I would love to just kind of ask around leaders are integrating DEIB into their broader talent engagement and productivity strategies, but there are some concerns around this shift kind of risking marginalizing DEIB efforts. Does that sort of resonate with you, or do you feel like it offers a more sustainable approach to embedding these principles into everyday business? So would love to kind of hear from you all around, again, this sort of integration of DEIB into just company DNA and how we can do that really effectively. So I'm going to kick this over to Milena first.
Sure thing, Zara. And I think my answer to this question definitely builds upon the answer that Raj just gave to the previous question, because I think it's all about how do you tie your DEI efforts to whether you're using OKRs, KPIs, whatever goal setting framework you're using, but how do you tie your DEI efforts to the core things that your business cares about? Again, we've read a lot in the news that might be also a little bit provocative of what I'm going to say next, but like for some companies who did not have a very effective centralized DEI practice that was, never given budget, never given power, never given, never managed to work within that framework of am I actually affecting the core objectives of the business with my work, it might be the right decision to disassemble that way of operating DEI in the organization. What has to happen in parallel to that is not just to say, yeah, we disassembled it and we've stopped everything. I was just working with another customer who had let go of their chief diversity officer, and I said, is there a plan to hire a replacement? And they said no. And that's not because of our lack of commitment, but because we want to do it differently this time. And so what happens in that case when you kind of disassemble this centralized office, which traditionally has been very underfunded with very little power, I gotta tell you, because at the end of the day, it's about budgets. If you don't have budget to spend on an initiative, like how much can you do as a leader just from having, cross-functional influence is very hard to do without money, right? So that's one of the biggest things I always advocate for. If you're going to have a CDO, then give them real budget, just like you're giving it to the rest of your C-level executives, right? But if you're not going to have that because let's say the frameworks didn't work out, they weren't tied to OKRs, etc., the work that needs to happen in parallel is that caring about our people, and again, let's reframe this work about people. It's about our people. It's people work, right? And then it becomes everybody's job, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be the hot potato that gets kind of passed on from HR to the C-level, to the Diversity Council, to the ERGs, to the affinity groups. No, it needs to be actually everybody's job in everybody's KPIs So whatever objective you are, marketing leads, well, look at it from the inclusive perspective. Sales leads and sales performance, look at it from the inclusion perspective. Suppliers management, look at it from the diverse. So every department gets to basically care about how does DEI affect them. And I will say one thing, that framework is going to require a major investment in upskilling of everybody in those topics, because people don't know what they're doing in general. That's why they had hired decentralized experts to lead their efforts, because the regular sales leader, the regular technology leader, the regular chief operating officer, they have no idea how to talk about to their workforce the next day, after yet another Black man in America gets murdered, right? And so it is so important that we all invest in our upskilling, and in our whole workforce really getting leveled up on all these topics. Yeah, have a lot of passion and ideas about that from.
Yeah, we can hear that. Thank you for kicking us off, Milena. Jacquees and Ra?
Yeah, no, I totally echo everything that Milena said. I think what I have seen when you think about people, profit, and mission, no one starts an organization or a company because they don't want it to be successful or profitable, right? And so to have DE&I or DNI or whatever you call it, not ingrained into the fabric of the strategic plan of the organization is automatically going to set it up for failure. We've had multiple companies that have come and asked us to partner and say, well, can we just do this one-off initiative? And anytime it is a diversity initiative, it's a Band-Aid. And in almost to the wire, you can calculate 90 days to, several 6 months or so that they come back and they have another issue, or it's the same issue that has represented itself because it was a one-off initiative and not ingrained into the organization. And so to see it being ingrained, whether it's being dismantled and rebuilt or shifted or repurposed, it's the right thing to do. It should be ingrained into the fabric of the organization. Inclusive talent, I focus on talent acquisition, but inclusivity, that thread should be pulled through the fabric of the whole organization, right? And I agree, everything that was said. It's not just one organization's, or one section of the organization's responsibility. It's a thread that has to be inclusive. How about that, right? Yes, it has to be pulled through all the way. So I certainly echo and would just say absolutely the same.
Yeah, +3. Here we go, right? And I want to say that it is a 21st century leadership imperative that this be integrated, because if we're truly talking about the best talent, if we're truly talking about being able to build structures that thrive and that meet and exceed expectations in terms of mission and profit, then we are going to really be opening up the door to have access to the best, which means that every facet of how we operate needs to be DEI informed, let me say, right? Or inclusion informed. And so I think Milena raises for me a really important question, which is, what does the development and training look like to get people ready to do that work, right? So as it becomes integral to the DNA, all these letters, right? As it becomes integral to the DNA of the organization, what are the skills and the capacities that are going to be required now to invest in to ensure that people are able to carry that mantle in ways that feel really aligned with the ways in which they lead? So this brings us back to the people investment. This brings us back to the opportunity for growth and the opportunity to grow their capacity. Because again, if I look at something that's coming down the pike and I don't feel I'm informed about it, I don't feel I'm equipped to carry it, I don't feel like I'm able to participate in it, that is a 100% setup for failure. So I appreciate the unmarginalization or the unmarginalizing of DEI, right? Because we also know, right, Melinda, that happened, right? As much as experts were hired and maybe given budgets, they were also in some ways put in Siberia. And I think the opportunity for integration is an invitation for an up-leveling of every facet of our leadership within these organizations. And I think that that's the only way you're going to grow. So, has to happen, I think, truly, if we're serious about it.
I love that. So many good call to actions coming out of this final question right here. Again, back things with money, right? Folks in the chat are kind of sharing about how when things don't have money backing them, they're probably destined to fail down the line. Really centering and customizing our growth and investing in upskilling, right? Being strategic and sustainable. How are we making sure things are built into company DNA for long term? I love that. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists who have been here, who have been sharing their insights and such great tips for us to be mindful of. Just want to share some quick takeaways from today's session, just for folks to kind of be aware of. And so you'll see that some of the takeaways are just around evolving our DEIB role, emerging trends, measuring success, and then of course, making sure that we have sustainable DEIB integration. So for folks that want to screenshot this slide, please, we'll leave it up for just a second. But I do have one last quick question for our panelists, if you can just wrap this up in 30 seconds or less. But what is one thing that you are taking from this conversation? And I also invite our attendees to drop something in the chat around what they are taking from this conversation. So for this one, Ra, I'm going to kick it over to you first.
I think this commitment to people is alive and well. And I feel like we want to remember that. We want to keep that ever present and in front of us. And that this opportunity is really about how do we get better for the people we want to serve? How do we get better for the missions we're here to contribute to? And to know that our ability and our capacity to do that in a way that enables more people to thrive is the name of the game. I think the transformation of zero sum, I think we're all over it, right? I think we all want more systems and structures where more people can advance and succeed in ways that are meaningful. And I love the way that we work with the data while also ensuring that we're customizing it to meet our own solutions and the moments that we find ourselves facing as organizations and entities.
Thank you so much, Raj. Jacquees, over to you quickly.
Really quick, 3 words that stand out for me that reoccur throughout this conversation is inclusion, data, and growth. And they are all primarily the focus, it seems like, for all of us and throughout all of the areas. So D&I is not going anywhere, it's evolving.
Love that. Thank you, Jacquees. Milena?
I'll keep it to one sentence. Upskill everybody so that they can be a part of driving DEI at every business function.
Love that. I love that. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. Again, thank you to our attendees for being here, for being part of this amazing session. Continue to kind of follow Power to Fly. We have another session coming up right behind this one. So before we kind of before we wrap up this session, just want to also remind folks to connect with Power to Fly as well as our amazing partners. We have QR codes on the screen that you can scan. And now I'm actually going to pass it over to the next moderator for the following session, Quinn. And thank you again to everyone who was here with us.
Thank you so much, Zara. I appreciate that kind introduction, and I even appreciated getting a couple of nuggets from that last panel. Like she said, my name is Quinn Conyers, and I have the honor, the privilege, and a pleasure to kick off this panel. And let me tell you, if you have been liking and loving what you've been hearing so far, I promise you who we have on this next panel will rock your world and blow your mind. So we are going to have a conversation all about innovate and elevate, engage, retain, succeed, the path to peak performance. And that's exactly what we're about to talk about right now. We have a few powerhouse panelists who are going to join us. I'm going to introduce them, and then we are going to kick off this conversation. So if you are excited to hear from them, I want you to go ahead and just type "I'm ready" in the comments, and we're going to go ahead and get this party started. As you can see on the screen, there is some information about Power to Fly's code of conduct. So make sure that you are mindful and cognizant of that. And the next
next couple of screens that you'll see is our lovely panelist, as well as some awesome and amazing supporters who are just making sure that the Power to Fly team is really amplifying and illuminating how we work and how we do things and how organizations are attracting and hiring and retaining diverse top talent. So you can see that on the screen, but don't take my word for it. We're going to go a little bit beyond the stats. We're going to go a little bit beyond the statistics and things like that. You're going to hear from people who are really, really intentional about doing this work. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Up first for this awesome and amazing panel discussion, we have Jason Putnam, and he is the Chief Revenue Officer at Plum. As you can see, he is an award-winning sales leader. He oversees Plum's strategy, driving revenue generation initiatives and expanding into new markets to meet customer demand. Now, since joining Plum in December of 2021, Jason has helped drive substantial growth in the company's pipeline and client base, which under his guidance jumped 20% in 6 short months. Prior to Plum, Jason has served as Senior Vice President and General Manager for the Enterprise Business Unit of PandoLogic. Let's go ahead and give Jason a welcome. All right, welcome, Jason. All right, joining Jason on this awesome and amazing panel is the one and only Kylie Piper. Now, Kylie is the lead people partner at 15Five. She is a seasoned HR and people leader. She's currently serving as lead people partner at 15Five with a deep focus on human-centered leadership. She collaborates closely with senior business leaders to drive higher employee engagement, performance manager effectiveness, and retention. Now, prior to joining 15Five, Kylie held leadership roles at XtraCard, Canvas, and Credit Karma, where she optimized HR processes and advanced diversity hiring efforts. Let's give Kylie a warm welcome. All right. Also, too, joining Kylie and Jason, we have the sensational Sienna J. Brown, and she is the head of growth at Power to Fly and probably a familiar face to many of you. Now, Sienna is the head of growth at Power to Fly. Her mission is to build a new wave of leadership focused on inclusion and intention in the workplace so that every individual has an equal opportunity to reach their full potential. Her thought leadership around topics related to inclusion, leadership, and cross-cultural understanding has been highlighted by NPR, CNN, TEDx, Insider, USA Today, and more. Let's welcome Sienna to the stage. I want to make sure that you understand that even though we're virtual, I still want you to get excited and ready because they have so much information that is really going to just elevate the way you think about workplace and engaging and innovation. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I want to give you kind of how this panel conversation is going to go. Not only am I going to make sure that Jason, Sienna, and Kylie's voices are heard, if at any time during this conversation you have an aha moment or you have a question, I want you to go ahead and pop that in the chat, and I will be integrating your questions throughout this conversation. And that's what I want you to know. So here's what you need to understand. We're going to do this kind of 2 different ways. I have some questions that I would like for everyone on the panel to answer. And then I'm going to do some questions, what I call popcorn style. These are questions that I know that you would like to be answered. I'm going to throw them out there. And if Jason or Sienna or Kylie wants to answer it, they can. But just know I'll be integrating your questions as well. So let's go ahead and get started with this very first question, because I want to make sure that you understand that you're going to learn a few things during this conversation. Number 1, how building high performance teams is needed and necessary, how linking retention and engagement and upskilling. Also, 2, how tailored solutions for specific challenges are going to be part of your superpower, and also how to measure things for success, because there are so many things that you could use during the conversation that we're going to have today. And also, this webinar is eligible for SHRM credits. So I'm going to start off with a question for all, meaning I want Sienna, I want Jason, and I want Kylie's 2 cents, right? So I want to start with you, Sienna. What are some of the key factors in building high performance teams that also prioritize employee well-being, especially because many of us are still in a hybrid or remote work setting? Sienna, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, Quinn, I love your energy. It's 8 p.m. over where I'm at in Spain, and I'm just like, yes, wake me up. I love it. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic just because I think it's something that's extremely timely, right? How do we have high performing teams while also we might have leaner teams than what we had 2 years ago, or we also might have different opportunities in our team, especially for individuals who have been here for a little bit longer. And I think I would break it down to three different things. And that first thing is really understanding your team and their needs, right? If you were listening to our previous session, we were talking a lot about having a people first mentality. And I think that that's something that's really important to understand. High performing for one person might look different than what high performing for a different person looks like. And so when you're really able to take the time to understand the individuals and their needs on your team, it will help you also be able to understand what is the structure that you need to be able to create to elevate everyone to have what you consider high performing. And then speaking of that, what does high performing actually mean, right? So by having clear communication and also having a clear goal setting system and having that with the sentiment of transparency really allows for individuals to not just feel as if you're creating the definition of high performing and everyone needs to sprint to that finish line, but instead you're co-creating what does that look like, right? Is that efficiency? Is that being able to lean in and saying that we're being more innovative? And so when you're creating those goals, thinking through that in a collaborative way. And the last thing that I'll say to just tie this to a sentiment of inclusion as well as well-being is really thinking about what does flexibility and autonomy look like, especially if you are in a remote work setting or a hybrid setting, right? So for me personally, it's 8 p.m. where I'm at because I'm located in Spain. I'm originally from New York. I've been here and working remotely actually for the last decade, right? And so when we really think about what does flexibility and autonomy look like for different individuals in a remote setting, whether they might be parents or caregivers, whether they might have an autoimmune disease, whether they might have a disability, whatever that looks like, being able to honor that. And then again, knowing who you have on your team so you can set them up for what high performance means and looks like for them, while also mitigating your own sense of bias of what you might think that definition should be.
Thank you for that insight. And I don't know if I should say good morning or good evening, but either way, we are happy to have you here because I know that we are joining from all over. So good morning or good evening to wherever you are in the world. And thank you for that insight, Sienna. So Jason, I'm going to come over to you. Same question, of course, your insights. What do you believe that are some of the key factors in building high performance teams that also prioritize employee well-being? Because a lot of times, especially if it's remotely, or hybrid work, that it could be high performing that could lead to burnout. And burnout is a huge thing right now. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I agree with the energy level. I'm in central time zone, so I need a little pick me up at 2 o'clock. So thank you. I love the question. I believe that building a happy, high performing team is placing individuals in a role, in the right roles right from the beginning, right from the outset. Too often people are placed in roles based on kind of what they've done historically from a hard skills perspective. Like, do you know this particular skill or that particular skill? But just because it's the same job doesn't necessarily mean that person will be happy. It depends on what the hiring team wants. It depends on the culture and the environment of that particular place. So from a personal perspective, take me, for example, I held the same role as I have today at a previous company. And I had the same objectives, the same outcomes that I was supposed to attain as I do at Plum. And it was also a remote environment, just like we are at Plum. But there, I couldn't be innovative, which is something that comes very naturally to me. And I couldn't work with people in a way that kind of honored their unique skill sets and their personalities. Those are two of my kind of top talents. And as a result, I hated my job. I hated getting out of bed every day, even though I was a very high performer in that job. And at Plum, though, where at the very beginning I was matched using what Plum does from a psychometric data perspective, and those innate skills that come naturally to me, embracing diversity being one of them and innovation being another, I was a 97% match out of 100 for what Plum was looking for somebody in my job. So even though it's the same job, I hop out of bed every day at Plum. I close my laptop at the end of the day and I'm celebrating that I had such a good day. Again, doing the exact same job. So when you match people based on that data and you put them in roles which they can flourish, the outcome of that is they stay 3 years longer. And the business naturally thrives because that person who's doing those things that come naturally to them, not only stay 3 years longer, they are 322% more productive, regardless if they're remote, flex, or in the office.
Oh my goodness, I love it. The transparency and the authenticity, Jason, that you just gave us, just about having a similar role in two different, companies. I'm sure people are like, is Plum hiring? I've never heard someone talk so highly, of a job. Like that sounds really, really great. And I loved your insight on placing people in the right roles from the beginning. I thought that was really, really paramount. So thank you for sharing. Kylie, I am coming to you. I really would love your insight on this question as well. Just as a reminder, what do you believe in your experience are some of the key factors in building a high performance team that also prioritizes employee well-being, especially for a lot of these companies and organizations who have a hybrid or remote work setting? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much. I just have to say, Jason and Sienna's answers are so perfect. So by no means I want to take away from either. I think there's so much overlap in the work that Power to Fly, Plum, and 15/5 are doing. Us three could probably get in a room and talk for like 24 hours straight. But I think from my position as someone in people leadership, I really think that the key to building those high performing teams, and this is something we think about often and is in our everyday vernacular at 15/5 of balancing high performance and high care for our people. But particularly in these remote and hybrid settings, we really believe it starts with creating a workplace where all of our employees feel genuinely connected to their work, their goals, and their peers. That has been really hard over the last few years. So at the heart of this is balancing those clear expectations with empathy. So we first do that by providing clarity and purpose. We believe those are essential. We think that people thrive when they know why their work matters and how their efforts contribute to the big picture. Setting those clear expectations for performance is foundational, but what's equally important is being open to feedback and adaptable to each team member's needs, as Sienna had said. Oops, sorry, I don't know what. Am I okay? Am I good?
Yep, you're good. We can hear you again. Yep,
Okay,
you're fine.
cool. So what I was saying was, for example, hybrid work allows us to consider how and where each person is at their best. This has shifted a lot, even for me personally. I'm expecting my first child. So I'm like, wow, I'm finally stepping into the shoes of a working parent and seeing how working from home has drastically changed what like my needs have been. So it's been a really cool journey, but I think encouraging employees to communicate their optimal work conditions shows we are invested in their success. And I've just seen that through and through. I think second is investing in growth and autonomy, another key point. For example, offering those targeted upskilling opportunities, whether that be through mentorship, workshops, or career coaching, it gives employees a path to grow even in our really fast-paced, often startup environments. And beyond that skill building, it also means allowing people to really own their roles, empowering them to take initiative while knowing they have the trust and support of their leadership teams. And then finally, without being super long-winded, I think building team rituals that bridge that virtual gap cannot be overlooked. This is something we're working through every day. I don't think we have the perfect solution yet, but I think we all know how important those water cooler conversations used to be, that in-office banter. So now more than ever, I think it's crucial to create those really intentional opportunities for connection and camaraderie. So that could be the regular team check-ins, the virtual coffee chats to keep those bonds alive. We're testing out a question Friday where we have a host each Friday come with a really fun question. We're thinking of bringing in some of our different ERGs and some of our Slack groups like Chefs of 15/5. So I think it's just really a blend of structure and empathy where our employees feel seen, supported, they're inspired to grow, and they're allowed to bring their best selves to work. And I think in today's landscape, that's the winning formula for high performance, at least for us and what we've defined it as.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I think that the beauty of different perspectives and thoughts are that what works for different companies can work for that different company, right? It's not a one size fits all. I love what you said about, making sure that you're balancing these high performance, requests or demands with empathy. Because I feel like that wasn't something that was always there. It was just like, just work, meet your sales quota, meet your data, do, versus taking consideration that Kylie's going to be a new mom. Congratulations. If you are a mom or you have seen a child in your life before, just type mom in the comments. We want to make sure that Kylie knows that she is loved, she's appreciated, because that is definitely a new thing, right? To become a mom and also balance your career with a mom. So moms are going crazy in the comments right now. So I love it. And also, Kylie, you wrapped us up with talking about how to be innovative with these virtual water cooler conversations. Because you're right. At one point in time, it was being in person and definitely having those conversations. And how can you be innovative with making sure that people are connected in a virtual or hybrid kind of work environment? So, let's go ahead and keep it moving. And also, Jason, you definitely had a compliment here in the comments as well. Someone, I want to say it was Joe. Joe loves your Stormtrooper helmet, FYI. So every time you do a Zoom or something like that or do a meeting, keep that in the in the frame. So he really loved that. So let's go ahead. I want to really I'm going to stay with you, Kylie, for just a second, because I want to kind of shift it a little bit to a couple of conversations or questions I want to ask individually. So, Kylie, when it comes to companies effectively linking retention and engagement and upskilling to create a cohesive strategy that benefits both employees and their organization, what do you think that some of those best practice we can do to effectively link the retention and engagement to upskill and create a cohesive strategy that's beneficial to both employees and the organization? Kylie, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, I love it. This is all 15.5 and all about what our platform does. I think this is about recognizing that each of these elements amplifies the others when they're approached cohesively. So first, aligning upskilling opportunities within the skills of the organization and the needs that they have for the future is crucial. I think Jason really hit on this with making sure that, you're hiring the right person for that role. I think when employees see that their growth areas are prioritized by the company, it really creates a sense of belonging and purpose. So linking retention, engagement, upskilling really starts with aligning that growth with the company's needs. I think the upskilling also has to be actionable and relevant. I think giving employees stretch projects or cross-functional opportunities lets them apply those new skills in really real ways, which of course boosts their confidence and gives them a sense of purpose. I mentioned this before, but I think transparency is also key. When employees understand how their growth supports the organization, it reinforces a shared purpose. And by personalizing that upskilling to match each person's career interests, we signal an investment to their future, which naturally drives that retention. So ultimately, when employees feel they're growing and contributing meaningfully, they're more likely to stay engaged and invested in the company's success. They know at that point, they're not only building their skills for today's role, but also preparing for future roles, whether that be within the organization or not, but hopefully within, which has a positive impact, again, on both engagement and retention. I think, go ahead.
No, go. I'm just agreeing.
I was going to say, I think that we've also seen that engagement increases when people can apply those new skills in really meaningful ways. So upskilling to me doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It needs to be linked with real world applications. So giving employees those stretch projects or opportunities to collaborate with their cross-functional teams, that allows them to bring really fresh skills to the table and again, bring confidence to their roles. And then I think a crucial piece in connecting those strategies is again, communicate the why. If there's anything I've learned as a people leader, it's show the importance to them, communicate the why, and communicating the why behind upskilling and those development efforts. Employees want to know that their growth is mutually beneficial. So it not only opens up career paths for them, but strengthens the teams and supports the organization's goals. And then finally, I think common theme we'll hear today is taking a personalized approach. When we create those learning opportunities tailored to employees' career interests, we're signaling that we're invested in them as individuals. And that commitment to each person's potential encourages loyalty. It motivates those people to invest back in the organization. And in the end, when those people feel like they're growing and contributing meaningful ways, retention becomes the natural outcome. I could keep talking on this for hours, so I will leave it there, but I really appreciate the question. I love talking about this.
Yeah, no, great insight. And Sienna, as Kylie was talking, I just saw you nodding your head. So I'm going to invite you to jump in on this conversation. And Jason, you can as well. But Sienna, is there anything that you want to add in regards to either what Kylie said, or just a question in general, about what I just had mentioned?
I mean, I love this. And also, Kylie, I was snapping 100%. And I think something that I don't want to add too much because I know that we have a lot to kind of dig into, but I think just something I want to double tap on what Kylie was saying was really being able to also understand and bridge the gap. And so I think oftentimes where organizations find themselves in a limbo is being able to say, we want to invest in individuals' career development, but how does this tie to our organizational goals? Right. And again, this goes back to the lens of, and I think Kylie communicated this in a wonderful way, but how are we really being able to tap into individuals' intrinsic motivation? And then also as leaders in an organization as well, being able to not just give cookie cutter training or upskilling opportunities, but really being able to create a conversation and hear what is it that people need. And I loved what Kylie shared as well, as really being able to integrate the sentiment of value, right? This isn't just taking a course or reading a resource or applying something into your role, but how are you really contributing into your own career development, but then also the value that that has in your own role in the department and in the organization, and recognizing that more consistently. Because I think, again, there's a lot of doing and a lot of things that we try to implement, but then also how do we recognize when individuals are actually putting in the work and taking that extra step to really invest in their future, which in turn will impact the organization, their engagement, and their retention as well.
Yeah, great insight. I think that you're exactly right, and it's so great to get different perspectives. So, Sienna, I appreciate that great piggyback, because I did see you kind of snapping over here. So I love that. Jason, I'm going to come back to you for a second, and I think this question is going to be very timely, because I think it not only aligns with what you said in the previous question, but I think it would make sense for where you are now. 80% of workers are reportedly looking for new opportunities in 2024 as well as 2025. What innovative approaches are you seeing in retaining top talent, and how does employee well-being kind of play into that?
I'm going to give you two answers on it, and a lot of it goes back to what were just mentioned in the previous question. And I want to look at it from both the human side of it, but even a scientific side, if I can. So there's this thing that's happening as the old guy in the room. It's like things feel different now, and there's a great writer out there. He's a futurist named Ira Wolf, and he's coined this thing called the pace paradox. And what the pace paradox means, and I'll get to my point here in a second, is the amount of change that happened from 2000 to 2004, that 5-year period of time, has already happened in 1 year this year. And if you look ahead to 2044, 20 years from now, the same amount of change that happened in 5 years will happen in a matter of weeks. So when we start talking about retention, we've got to get, as she mentioned, we've got to get to the why of this. So why are people looking for jobs? And a lot of it is we're not doing a good job, or employers aren't doing a good job on the retention side, because what we used to do a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it doesn't work anymore. And people are either not feeling seen or they're feeling burned out. So it's the combination of those people feeling burned out, but also, again, from a data perspective, the half-life of skills now is about 2.5 years. So what that means is if an employer is looking for somebody with 5 years experience and the half-life of skills is only 2.5 years, when you start bringing people into your organization, you have to constantly be upskilling them, because the skills they know today are going to be irrelevant maybe as quick as 12 months from now. So this ladder progression that I went through in my career is really very passé now. It's much more about this lattice approach that you have to do. So that's the first half of the answer. The second half of the answer from a human perspective is people tend to quit leaders. They don't tend to quit their jobs. So you really have to build loyalty into the organization. You can't demand loyalty. So for me, the combination of consistency and honesty over a period of time equals loyalty. You know, I'm very blessed from a Plum perspective. I have several employees here. We've been at 5 companies in a row. Several have been at 3 companies in a row. Several two companies in a row, because we can have open and honest conversations. I've always said, if you can go find your dream job, go find it. I'm not going to be mad. And just having that human level connection with people is honestly why people end up staying, because they can go find a job at any time somewhere else, but you can't leave and rebuild that loyalty that has taken so long to build. That's the thing people don't want to give up on. And that's the thing people really seek out in their career.
If you are bombarded on LinkedIn with resumes, Jason, I know exactly why. I mean, like people are probably thinking in their mind, oh my goodness, Plum sounds amazing. You've given us so much information. Thank you so much for giving us some context around the pace paradox. I thought that was very interesting. And Trisha Sexton in the comments says it is spot on. And sometimes, it can be exhausting, trying to kind of keep up and constantly upskill your skill set. But also, too, if a job or an employer is looking for 5 years and you have 2.5 years of experience, right? So I appreciate that. Now, as you both were talking, I'm going to go off script just a little bit because I think that as we are talking about retention and up-leveling your skills, one thing that kind of came to mind as all three of you were talking, especially Jason, when you had just mentioned that before how fast and quickly things are turning, it would be a change or a shift or a transition in 5 years is now happening in 12. I remember like soft skills were huge and communication and public speaking was considered a soft skill. And I completely disagree with that, right? I think that if you want to either grow in your career or you want to retain some of the top talent, it's going to require that employers and organizations don't look at speaking and communicating as a soft skill, but as a superior skill. So I would love, Sienna, Kylie, and Jason to give your, your insight. Jason, we're going to start with you. I saw your hand. How do you feel about growing in a company and how communication skills, especially now that we're in a virtual and hybrid world, play a part in you being an effective employee, but also too, people are losing people, like you said, not because of the job. It's because I don't like the way that manager or supervisor talked to me. I'm quitting because he needs polishing on how he communicates, right? Jason, thoughts?
Yeah, so the reason I raised my hand is what you just mentioned is what Plum does as a company, right? So we have coined the term durable skills and don't use soft skills anymore because it's what gets you out of bed every day. You can build coping mechanisms about them, but if you're not somebody who embraces teamwork, which is a natural thing, I'm somebody as an executive, I'm very low in teamwork, but I've had to get better at teamwork or people aren't going to like working for me, right? But if I did teamwork, if I had to go to a happy hour every day in my job, I wouldn't like working here and I'd probably go work somewhere else. So it's that combination, especially with the speed of change and how quickly hard skills are changing. The only way in the future we're going to be able to match people to jobs where they're going to be happy, fulfilled, and thrive, and where the business is going to do incredibly well is by matching people to those durable skills. And it's not snake oil. It's a science that's been around for 70 years. 80 years, we do it at scale. And it's taking those innate abilities, those durable skills, the things that get people out of bed and happy every day, and matching them to those things on the role. And what ends up happening from a hiring perspective is historically we've only used hard skills to hire people. I want to make sure Sienna has 5 years experience, you can type this many words a minute, et cetera, whatever it may be. But then when you're brought into the organization, and this has DE&I impacts, the people who are getting promoted for different reasons. They have grit, they're good in teamwork, they're good communicators. So for the same reason we're bringing people into the organization is not the reason we're scaling them within the organization from a career perspective. And that disconnect is one of the main things that's broken.
Jason, I think that you were singing our song and doing our dance, right? I mean, like everyone, I think that people were on camera, we can see facials, but if not, I think we're all snapping. Sienna, I'm going to come to you, then I'm going to go to Kylie, just so you know. Janine says former soft skills are now critical skills. Skek says we would call those soft skills essential skills. We know that Plum calls those skills durable skills. So I love that. Sienna, I saw you kind of over there doing a little bit of this. What do you think about, some of these skill sets in regards to soft versus superior or essential or durable?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Ironically enough, this is what keeps me up at night. But I think exactly like between Plum 15.5 and Power to Fly, we all have a very similar lens into skills. And like if we're thinking about it, we're moving into a skills-based economy, right? I don't like the word economy because we're talking about people, but we're moving into a skills-based revolution, right? And when we think about this at Power to Fly, we've actually created a framework that almost creates a trifecta, right? Technical skills, people skills, and business skills. So thinking about what are the technical skills that you need to do and excel in your role and potentially in other roles if some of those are transferable. People skills, how do you work well with people, right? So again, the snaps that Jason is getting, like, how are you being a great leader? How are you able to influence others? How are you able to really not just in alignment with your title, but also in alignment with the impact that you're making in an organization? And then the business skills. how can you tell storytell with data, right? How are you able to use negotiation to gain buy-in? And something that we've really learned and done over the years, both in the training that we do with all of our organizations, as well as our online learning development platform, is really being able to say, how are we not just able to teach individual skills, but actually give them the resource and support to understand what are their skills and strengths that they currently have, right? What is their zone of genius? And then I was mentioning this in one of our previous talks, but as a team and as an organization, being able to look at our people as a puzzle, right? So again, Jason might be great at data-driven storytelling and Kylie might be great at gathering and analyzing that data. How can we match them together so that it's not just the skills through platforms or learning, but also a collective learning as well? And the last thing that I would just say is like, as we think about skills, especially if you're someone, whether you're looking at hiring, engagement, retention, employee sentiment, which I also think is tied directly to all of these different things, looking at this through a lens of inclusion. So Jason, I loved what you were sharing in regards to, okay, the people who get promoted. How are we looking at that as an organization? Do the loudest people get celebrated and promoted? Do the people who give the quickest answer get celebrated and promoted, right? And so really being able to analyze and look at from a cultural perspective as well, how are we being conscious of what types of skills we celebrate, and how are we learning to become more inclusive, and what are the skills that are often overlooked? And I think through that lens as well, we're able to create more opportunity for not just a certain type of role or skills or even the trifecta stand out, but really being able to give individuals the path to what that growth looks like in the organization. And going back to what Kylie had shared previously, but tying that to value and impact, right? So your skill in being able to be a great project management doesn't just mean that an event goes smoothly. It means that you're able to increase the brand's reputation and our OKRs, because you know what I mean? So it's like driving that value and then also creating space for that acknowledgement as well, not just for a certain type of skills, but then also being able to, again, I just saw in the chat, right? Like bringing them all together. So we have technical, we have people, we have business, but in reality, in the Venn diagram, you're going to have some of those things that touch on all three. And that's really what will make you stand out in the workplace and really be able to help you really develop and increase your skills. Kylie, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Joe's comment in the chat really hit home for me because while I'm an extroverted person, I am a people leader and I'm a business partner that supports our entire organization of very, very different people. And by no means would I ever want someone to think that because they're introverted or their communication has, room for improvement means that you wouldn't be as successful. It's absolutely not what that means. What we're kind of saying is that these communication skills are being increasingly viewed as durable, but I have never seen more training courses on communication than in the last few years. Communication has changed so much since so many companies have gone remote. I mean, nonverbal communication is half of communication. So a lot of us are having to relearn how to communicate in these remote environments. This is my third webinar this week, but it's the first one where I've been able to see everyone. And when I was only seeing myself on the screen earlier this week, I truly felt like I like didn't know how to gauge if people were enjoying what I was saying, if they disagreed. Like I had no idea. So I think this is increasingly changing, but I think unlike the technical skills, which may become outdated, may change as technology evolves, strong communication skills, which doesn't have to mean extroverted, will remain essential and adaptable, and they're very learnable. Joe, so like, don't worry, there are so many courses, and what you kind of have to think about is that confrontation and having those critical conversations, or what we call at 15-5 clearing conversations, make you so much better at your job. And it really just takes practice. And know that you are absolutely not the only one. So I think that communication really does help employees succeed in these changing environments. It will help you build relationships, and it will help you effectively lead and collaborate. And that durability makes communication a core competency for any long-term career growth. But just know this is a muscle that we all have to flex and keep working at. So I'm encouraging you, keep at it. It's something we all have to keep practicing.
Yeah, and Joe, I saw your comment as well. Just so you know, 70% of the world are introverts or identify as introverts. So just because the extroverts like myself are louder doesn't mean that that's the norm, right? But 70% of the population identifies as introverts, and then you have the ambiverts who can kind of go either which way depending on, how they feel that day. So you are not alone. There are 70% or 69% of other people that are just like you. Sienna, as you were speaking, Michelle said that she loved your comment about zone of genius, as well as Amy Rowland is saying she loves this conversation, and she added a fire emoji, which means she's telling the truth, as well as Christy is talking about how her synergy, both yin and yang of the technical, the hard, and the interpersonal are both needed in the workplace. So the conversations keep going, and literally Jason says he's an introvert as well. See, again, matter of fact, let's make sure that Joe and Jason are all along. If you are also an introvert, just type me in the comments, right? We want to make sure here at Power to Fly, as we're having this conversation with Jason and Kylie and Sienna, that there's a mix of all of us. Some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts, some of us are ambiverts, and that is okay. And you are right. And Sienna, as you were talking, just about different skill sets and learning how to tell a story. And it brought me back to when Jason was talking about how things are changing rapidly. I'm a huge lover of LinkedIn, and there has been jobs that it is now the chief storyteller. Like, that's a job now, right? So the idea of being able to communicate your brand value, your organization, being able to speak in a way that's clear, concise, and compelling. And back to what Kylie said, it's not just the words that come out of your mouth, it's a nonverbal communication as well. That's also imperative, within your job, within your workplace, right? So Amy says she is also an extrovert, but at work, but as soon as she walks out the door, she's always an introvert. So we're going to call you an ambivert, Amy. Thank you for sharing. All right, we have some great, if you are loving this conversation so far, just put great combo. I just want to make sure that what Jason is saying, and Kylie and Sienna, like, you're just enjoying the conversation. Great combo, says Joe. Great combo, says Christy and Heather. Great combo, says Heather and Sabine and Michelle and Kristen and Rachel. Thank you so much. Well, we still have some questions. Okay. So the next question I want to ask, Jason, I'm actually going to come back to you for a quick second, because I believe that you can add some really, really energy and just insight around this. Now, you have been successful in scaling organizations and driving revenue growth. What connections do you see between upskilling these employees and revenue growth? And I know we touched on that a little bit earlier, but I really want to kind of hyper focus on, if these employee skills are up leveled, how can that drive revenue growth, especially for some of the organizations who might be struggling and investing in professional development for the employees?
Yeah, I love the question. Thank you for coming to me. The first part for me is, let's make sure people are, from a psychometric data, from a durable skills, the organization and the role they're in is going to be a good fit. If not, they're going to feel burned out and they're going to leave anyway. But I always use kind of the same approach when I'm going in to scale organizations. So I have this methodology, but I also bring people with me. So I may bring people with me who we have this mutual respect and mutual loyalty for, but the job they're going to be doing may be a little off from what they know from a skills perspective. So for me, I want that loyalty and that trust and respect first when we bring people in. I even do it in the interview process for people I've never met before. Like, we try to build this human connection. Then when I bring them in, I know, hey, do I have to come beside them and kind of work on it together with them? Do I just need to do it first and have them watch it? Or is that something that comes so naturally to them, even on the hard skills perspective, that they can, just go run up the hill without me? And some of that is observation, some of that is history. But I'll just tell a story because I think it's important. We have somebody who runs sales ops for us. It's a very data-driven job. He's very, very introverted. We don't have somebody at the time who did demand gen. So we said, hey, it's a lot of the same skill sets. A lot of people who do demand gen are also introverts, and his brain's great. So let's start sending him to some classes. So now he can come in and help on that side of the house. Or you may have somebody who did transactional sales. That's another story. I have somebody, we've been 5 companies in a row. He started out as a very transactional sales rep. Now he's one of the best enterprise sales reps in the market, because we took time to bring them along and teach them those things. And number one, hold him accountable. But number two, give him enough space where he can make the mistakes that somebody who's been doing it for 20 years took 20 years to make. And then we expect people to be perfect. We gave him time and space to make mistakes. And we embraced those mistakes and talked about the lessons we learned and why we won't do them again.
Yeah, thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate your insight, and I can tell from the conversation that people appreciate that insight as well. You know, Cian, I'm going to come to you, and I have a question, but I'm going to give it a little bit of spin because I believe that in the workplace right now, it's a real thing. So the question that I have for you, Sienna, and Kylie, if you want to jump in on it, or I have another question for you, is, as you're a person who has helped over 50 global organizations increase employee engagement, and what unique challenges do you see when trying to balance upskilling and retention, but primarily in workplaces where there are multi-generations, right? So for example, you are dealing with baby boomers, Gen Z, millennials. I mean, like this is the first generation where you can literally have somebody in their 20s and someone in their 70s on the same team. And that 20-something-year-old can be the boss of the 70-year-old, or the 70-year-old could be the boss of the 25-year-old. So when it's time to upscale, it might not mean everyone needs the same thing. So with your experience, with really helping over 50 global organizations increase employee engagement, what unique challenge do you see when trying to balance the upskills and retaining employees from multi-generations? Because the 35-year-old could need something from the 65-year-old to excel in the workplace.
Yeah, I love this question. I think just for context, so 50 organizations, that's great. So within Power to Fly, we do training, and we do both L&D with organizations in a live format as well as with on-demand training. And the interesting thing, and like I just want to pull in a little bit of data, a lot of organizations do learning and development, a lot of organizations do training, and at the same time, 70% of employees feel like the L&D in their organization can be improved. So I think that that's something that's really important to sit with, is not just saying, how are we doing L&D to check off a box, but really being able to say, how are we doing it in a way that's intentional and that will actually get people invested. And so I know that we're talking a lot about employee engagement, but I think one of the core things that bridges employee engagement and employee retention is employee sentiment. How does an individual feel about working at that organization? And then we dive in a little bit deeper to understand the why. And it's actually interesting because we've seen over a 92% increase in employee sentiment after the trainings that we've done in the different organizations. A couple of different things that tie into that. One, again, being able to, and whether this is multi-generational or any other type of intersectionality of identities, but being able to recognize that there are diverse learning needs and diverse learning methods, right? So in the same way that we were talking about extrovert and introvert, some individuals might be visual learners. Some individuals might need or take more time to process what they're learning. Some individuals might really thrive when it's in conversation or storytelling, and others might need to read a text, learn, and then apply it. So really being able to do a little bit of an audit and understanding, where's your company at? And again, we say company or organization, bring that down to the departmental level, bring that down to the team level, bring that down to the individual level. While it sounds like a lot, I promise you it's worth it. But being able to really have that understanding and having that conversation of what is the type of upskilling that will best serve you? And then again, how can we now tie that to the organizational needs? And so, Jason, I love the example that you had shared of being able to also recognize transferable skills as well, and just how important that is in regards to career growth. And so I think another part of that as well is, again, not just having L&D or trainings or upskilling be an initiative, because I think that's where a lot of organizations miss the mark of, it's another thing that we have to do, but we're putting that on everyone's plate as they have to hit their KPIs, and as we're coming around the holiday season, and as they might be becoming new parents, et cetera, or they might be dealing with, it's fine. There was a big storm in Valencia, which is about an hour away from me. And so like a lot of natural weather disasters or things that are going on in the world, but take this course at the same time, right? So I think also being able to have this sentiment of, number one, being intentional of not just having it be something that checks off the box, but then also being able to be inclusive in regards to how you roll out the initiatives that you're doing and how are you tying that to what really matters to other individuals. And the last thing that I would say, to specifically speak on the multi-generational aspect, also being able to understand how are you maintaining a sentiment of of connection and engagement. So yes, my manager might be 75. what do I have to learn from her? Because I'm sure that she has so much, she's a she in my world. She has so much information or knowledge or wisdom. And in the same way, how are we creating a sentiment of collective learning where she might be able to learn from me in regards, I'm not 25, but she can be able to learn from me in a lot of different ways in regards to what I might be a little bit more. And so I think in addition to leaders and organizations really integrating either the platforms or the resources, something that I really recommend and that I actually do on my teams is how are we leaning into collective learning, right? A great example, we were having a conversation on Tuesday actually with my team, and we were talking about, I know AI is a hot topic, I won't get into it that much, but how are we all using this in our day-to-day work? How is this implementing or integrating the efficiency that we have? How are we all continuously learning from another? And whether it's about a specific topic or creating and integrating time where individuals are talking about what they're learning, what they're doing, what they're reading on a more consistent basis. So it creates this sentiment of not just learning or upskilling from one person or one individual or one perspective, but doing it in a more collective way. And when I've seen it done right, I just always love shouting out this company. I won't use a name, but they actually did training and upskilling with us for their entire organization over, I want to say, for the last 3 years. And what I saw really worked was being able to have them be very strategic about who needs what, and then how are they rolling them through, and then also having that overlap. And that actually led to, again, over 90% of employee sentiment. It also led to them then being able to win one of the best companies with belonging at work awards. And so we were able to really see when you're able to integrate some of those best practices across generations, across locations, globally, across time in the company, it's really able to have that impact where it's not just being like, we have to do L&D because it's a checklist, but really being able to say, I know that my organization is invested in my growth, and I know that what I'm learning is going to be able to not just help me elevate my own career, but help elevate my work, which in turn will elevate the company's outcomes. And then going back to Jason's question, the revenue as well, right? Revenue, success across the board.
You know, Sienna, I think something that you mentioned, and I feel like has been a theme between just this whole idea of retaining employees and keeping top talent, especially whether it's multi-generational, just makes me think of empathy and respect really come up. Like, are you respecting the employees that you work with? You know, I remember when I got my first full-time job, I think I was like 26 and I inherited this team. And I remember they were all looking like, is it bring your daughter to work day? Because I was fresh out of college, right? And they were clearly, been in this job for a long time. And I remember there was this woman, I never forget her. Her name is Miss Esther. I was calling her Miss Esther in meetings because the ancestors would not let me call this woman, who was clearly my grandmother's age, by her first name. Like, it just wasn't. And because of that, and everyone saw me, they respected me because I respected them. I think that if you are leading these multi-generational teams, you come in like, you don't know how to work a cell phone, or you don't know how to use Chat GPT. Like, what's wrong with you? Get with the times versus let me show you how. It goes a long way. So I hear it kind of echo with Jason and Kylie in your answer as well, Sienna. It's about empathy and respect. So Kylie, I'm going to come to you with this same question because I saw you put that this question was fire. So I would love for you to answer this question as well in regards to when you are looking at, kind of really building out certain things and really connecting people and retaining them and, really making sure that they have what they need to exceed in their career. How do you do that when there's multi-generations, when you're looking at baby boomers and Gen Z and millennials, new moms? How does that work, right?
Yeah, this is spot on. And I was having such a reaction to Sienna because I obviously am more HR people side, but absolutely have an L&D arm as a part of us. But when you said the L&D to-do list, I'm like, dang it, it's everywhere. We use the HR homework, and it's like, how do we avoid this just being HR homework? And again, sharing the why, and like, this is so important. So we've iterated, we've tested, we've taken feedback, and kind of what's working for us is we're awarding it. So when we're doing these trainings, it's like, it's an award, and it's a privilege that we're like, we have these trainings and we see you as someone that's incredibly high potential. So we're awarding this. But I think to avoid that L&D to-do list to avoid that HR homework and for it to feel important to them. It's also really about like prioritization and integration. So at 15.5, we really focus on the targeted skill areas that align with both our goals as a company and the individual career paths. That way it really keeps the learning relevant, and then it also seems really manageable. So our platform in itself enables micro learning. So those are all on-demand trainings. They're bite-sized sessions. They fit into employees' workflows. They make upskilling feel super accessible and not overwhelming, says the feedback. But it also has a built-in focus on feedback and growth conversations. And 15.5 empowers employees to track their progress and celebrate those wins along the way. So we've talked a lot about with our product team, do we gamify this? Or how do we make it so it feels, again, like that award, or I'm really celebrating everything that I've done? And we've seen a lot of success across multi-generations with that. I think like the competitive nature is something that we see a ton at our company, but I think ultimately just fostering that culture of continuous learning and really show like where progress is valued. I think Jason had said this, over perfection. That is where we're able to ensure that upskilling becomes this inspiring part of work rather than an added stressor.
Oh my goodness. I wish we had more time. Not only is the chat box on fire, I think that Jason and Kylie and Sienna gave us such great information. If you agree, just go ahead and type in the comments more, right? Because sometimes we just need a little bit more time. But I definitely want to thank Jason and Kylie and Sienna for all the words of wisdom that they shared with us today. And I know that if we had more time, you have more valuable insight to share with us. For all of you who are joining us on this Power to Fly conversation, we thank you for giving us your time and your attention. I know that we have some closing remarks and slides that we want to share with you, but more importantly, I know that it was dropped in the chat box. If you want to connect with myself, Jason, Kylie, or Sienna, our LinkedIn is in the chat. Go ahead and do that if you want to continue the conversation. I'm sure that all of you are open to connecting beyond today's conversation. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Power to Fly as we have some awesome and amazing closeout slides and announcements. But more importantly, for everyone who joined us today, thank you so much. And a special thank you again to Jason, Kylie, and Sienna for this awesome and amazing conversation. So, a couple of things that you want to learn and follow through in regards to our conversation today. There was a couple of takeaways that I want you to make sure that you know, more importantly, that you write down. Number one, engaging, retaining, and succeeding is the path to peak performance. We talked about high performance teams. We talked about integrated strategy. We talked about talent retention and continuous learning. All of these are what's needed and necessary in our ever evolving workplace, whether you are still going into the office, but more importantly, for the majority of you who are hybrid or virtual, these are some of the key takeaways that you want to keep top of mind as you are continuing to do your job, but more importantly, how you can not only, advance, but also retain some of the people that you are working with. So Jason says, before this is over, he said he'd like to welcome everyone to take their Plum profile to learn more about your durable skill sets. And Jason had put that in the chat. So if you want to know what your durable skill sets are, Jason has an amazing tool. So if you can do me a favor, and if you can go ahead and click that link. Also, too, Jason, I know that you had mentioned this Plum profile to learn. I want to open it back up really quickly. Kylie or Sienna, did you have any last minute quick words that you wanted to share? Or do you want some of our audience members to do before we love them and leave them? Kylie, I want to go with you first. Any assessments, tools, or things you want to share, or final words of wisdom?
My gosh, I have so much, but I'll be quick. I was telling the crew at the very beginning, I'm the least salesy ever. I'm a people human through and through. So I was able to get free registration to our biggest event of the year. It's on my background, Thrive. It's completely accessible to anyone, HR leaders, but we would love to see you there. I'll put the registration in the link. Like I said, completely free. We'll be talking a lot about everything we discussed today and more on strategic HR. We've got some incredible hosts. So would love to see you all there, and I'll post the link.
And tell us again, what days, I know we can see it, but I know that I'm trying to cater to our audio learners as well, right? Not just our visuals. What date and what time is the Thrive event?
Yes, November 12th and 13th. We'll start around 10 a.m. Eastern and go to about 2 p.m. Eastern both days. So about half days, and you do not have to join for the whole thing. I can post the link, but if you go to our website, it'll show you the whole schedule. So if there's certain ones you want to pop in and out of, we'd love to have you.
Okay, awesome. So November 12th and 13th, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and if there is a link, I know Kylie's link is there, but if there's a link to Thrive as well, if you can drop that in the chat, I think that will be beneficial for our audience as well. All right, Miss Sienna, I am coming to you. Any final words of wisdom, or is there one thing that you want everyone to take away from this conversation? Go ahead, the floor is yours.
I mean, I'm honored I got a Miss title. I feel I feel like your previous colleague. I love this. No, I just want to invite all of you, and I'll drop this in the chat as well, to take our skills quiz. So I know that I spoke a little bit about the technical, the people, and the business skills, and I just want to invite all of you as individuals, but then also as leaders, to take out the skills quiz. You'll also learn more about our skills meter, which is our skill meter, which will allow for you to really be able to do a deep dive of an audit, to be able to understand not just what are the skills that you do have, but what are the skills that you do need to be able to grow. And so I just want to invite you to all do the HR homework, like Kylie was saying, but to really do that homework, to also have us lead first in that investment of continuing to understand what that looks like and where we can continue to upskill, and then how can we bring our learning and our lessons back to our team. And something to take away from this conversation, I just want everyone to feel empowered as well, to start thinking about how can we engage and retain the individuals that we have within our organization, and what is one small step or one small thing that you can take from today's conversation to then bring back into your work and your workplace as well.
Okay, well, listen, I usually don't speak for everyone, but I'm going to go ahead and jump out on a limb here. I feel empowered, right? So if you feel empowered by Jason and Kylie and Sienna's conversation, type empowered in the comments. And they not only gave us a rich conversation, they also gave us some HR homework that I think we would actually enjoy. Sienna talked about the skills quiz. Jason talked about filling out your Plum profile. That link is actually in the chat box. And then Kylie also invited us to Thrive, which is happening on November 12th and 13th. So I feel like we are empowered, we are inspired, we are enriched, we are educated by this awesome and amazing conversation. So again, thank you so much for that conversation. Now, before we go ahead and pass it over, I want to make sure there's no more housekeeping. I know that we already shared kind of one thing that we are taking away. If it is not, thank you so much. Rachel said, Quinn, you're a great host. I appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to the Power to Fly team, because I do know that we have one more conversation that is going to make sure that you continue your learning. So thank you so much again to Jason, Sienna, and Kylie. And thank you to all of you for allowing me to serve as your moderator for this awesome and amazing conversation.
Thank you so much, Quinn. And thank you to Jason, Kylie, and Sienna for an amazing panel. I feel empowered. So thank you all so much. And as Quinn said, we have one more session left today. So grab a drink of water, grab your coffee. It's 4 o'clock here on the East Coast, so I'm done drinking coffee, but maybe you're not. So we've got one last session, and we're going to jump into that in just a moment. Feel free to continue to introduce yourself in the chat. And also happy almost Halloween, happy almost Diwali for folks. So thank you all so much for being here today. And Isa, if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen, that would be great. Thank you again all so much for spending your Wednesday afternoon with us. My name is Rob Rebar, and I'm the Director of Events and Marketing here at Power to Fly. And again, I want to welcome you all to this judgment-free zone to explore pressing topics within the future of work and workplace DEIB. And I hope you've had a chance to take in some of the other talks we've done as part of today's Innovate and Elevate Virtual Summit. We've discussed upskilling, rebranding DEIB with our own CEO, Milena Berry. And as you probably just heard, employee engagement and retention. But if you missed any of those talks, don't worry. The recordings will be ready to watch in just a few days, and they're going to be waiting in your inbox. And today's conversation is very much inspired by the feedback we've been hearing from several of our partners around utilizing AI as a strategic initiative, especially within HR. And I'm very excited to be chatting with SHRM's George Rivera III in just a little bit. So why don't we jump on in, and Isa, you can go to the next slide there. And speaking of SHRM, here is your SHRM code for the event. So feel free to take a screenshot of this right now. And I'm also going to pop it here into the chat so you can utilize this after the event. And then if you want to go to the next couple slides, Isa, just shows some of the amazing partners that we have in attendance today, as well as in attendance at past events. So we were so grateful for you to be here, and also for thought leaders from all these amazing companies sharing your insights. And I just want to tell you a little bit about what we have coming up here. So please join us on November 20th for our Supporting Veterans, Active Service Members, and Military Spouses Summit to learn how to uplift this vital group of professionals. And I'm very happy to say Power to Fly is now accepting sponsorships for our 2025 Diversity Reboot Summit and Job Fair series, which will also see the return of such events as our Amplifying Black Excellence Summit and our Pride Championing LGBTQ Leaders Summit. Just follow up on your emails there. But yeah, no, you can go to the next slide, Isa, because this is just a general reminder that Power to Fly is here to be your partner in attracting, hiring, and retaining that engaged workforce. So we're very happy to follow up with any additional information. So now just want to walk through a little bit of what you can expect on today's session. So we're going to talk about the state of AI in HR and beyond. Going to be talking with George in just a bit. Then we're going to move into breakout rooms, and that's when we want to hear from you all about how you are using AI for recruiting, retention, and more. And remember, this is a group discussion, so we really do want to hear from you during that part after we get to our featured speaker. I will say that this section is being recorded and will be shared afterwards, but the breakout sessions will not be recorded or shared, so we can all have a nice, safe conversation. Okay, so let us dive into this topic with this next slide. Is a human looking at my application? So here at Power to Fly, we host monthly virtual job fairs. And there's probably not a job fair that goes by where a job seeker has not asked this question to me. Is a human looking at my application? And I'm happy to say that 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. But still, this is clearly very much at the top of minds for professionals. Perhaps some of the folks on the line here are wondering this when you've been applying to roles. So let's talk about what's happening. And on this next slide, there you go. Speaking of SHRM, here's some stats taken from their piece from earlier this year entitled How AI is Changing HR Jobs and Tasks. So the AI market is expected to see a 40% growth year over year. So if you don't feel like you're already seeing AI everywhere, which I know I am, you will be soon. And by 2028, the AI industry is expected to be worth $1 trillion, with both corporate giants like Google and Microsoft and up-and-coming startups providing tiers that are really industry-shaking players. And then finally, 76% of HR leaders believe they must start using AI in the next 12 to 24 months in order to stay competitive. And actually, that stat is from earlier this year, so many of you on the line have probably already begun to adopt AI in some way. Okay, so now on this next slide, Gartner walked through a 3-step approach to assess AI adoption in HR, including distinguishing reality from myth, establishing true potential of the technology, and assessing scoring criteria. So one of those is distinguishing reality from myth. So that is really the first step in assessing a new technology trend. And really, HR, DEIB, and talent leaders can work with IT, legal, compliance, and industry and subject matter experts to understand the true potential of technology and then report back to your leadership team. Next, we have implementing AI within the current boundaries of professional and industries will result in shifting roles over time. So we all kind of have heard this, right? Fewer people will be needed to complete the same amount of work. And leaders really need to redesign jobs disrupted by AI into smaller numbers of multi-skilled generalist roles that encompass a more comprehensive range of capabilities. Then there's race for performance. Performance expectations will increase in newly reconfigured roles, and organizations won't be able to compete without using AI. There's also improve efficiency and support leverage AI in HR use cases. Potential applications of AI solutions span the entire HR function, including talent acquisition, voice of employee, voice of the employee, career development, learning, and HR service management. And finally, accuracy and data privacy. While AI is creating excitement and hype, 77% of HR leaders are concerned about things like accuracy and verbosity when applying that technology for business use cases. There's currently no clear assurances of privacy or confidentiality. If we want to go to this next slide here, you can actually see also from Gartner some of the uses and planned uses of Gen AI from an HR standpoint. And that includes employee-facing chatbots, administrative tasks, and job descriptions and recruiting uses. As you can see, some uses of Gen AI have actually significantly reduced from 2023, specifically used in marketing and email communications. That's had a 45% decrease. Maybe this is from blowback around copy or unsuccessful copy or lessening results. So have you found you're using Gen AI more or less for certain tasks? So feel free to add that into the chat. And finally, before I bring up George, I wanted to leave you all with this quote, courtesy Elise Jason from Strive Health, which I really think puts the current conversation around AI and HR into context. And Elise says, HR leaders have the opportunity to reduce the fear around AI replacing jobs by creating a culture where digital curiosity is celebrated and by offering training to upskill their workers on how to lean in and leverage evolving technologies. At the end of the day, HR teams that find ways to incorporate AI into their workflows and find that balance between automation and the human touch will add the most value to their employees and customers. I love this. It really ties in. We started today talking about upskilling. We're ending today talking about AI. It all comes together in this quote. And with that, I'd love to bring George up to the stage. Thank you. Welcome, George. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're very happy to have you. And I'm just going to tell the folks a little bit about who you are. So George Rivera III serves as the Senior Vice President of SHRM Enterprise Solutions at the Society for Human Resource Management. You are responsible for broadening the awareness of SHRM's mission to enhance workforce development by building and strengthening partnerships with some of the largest enterprise organizations across the globe. And prior to joining SHRM, you spent over a decade honing that experience in HCM cloud technology, retirement, insurance, and other employee benefits, as well as HR services and PEO offerings. So you're definitely an expert on this subject, and we're very excited to have you here today.
Well, I'm excited to be here as well. Thank you so much. And yeah, this is the hottest topic around right now. So let's get it.
Awesome. Well, Isa, you can take down this slide so we can all see George nice and clearly. And in fact, actually, this topic actually came about in part. We were talking with a colleague of yours at a recent conference, and I know that SHRM is very much on the forefront in terms of HR as a strategic implement and in terms of HR as well. But so I'm really curious to begin with, how do you see AI transforming long-term business strategy, especially in areas like workforce planning and decision making?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, AI is transforming everything about business, right? There's not one piece of the business world that AI isn't touching, and frankly, the consumer and personal world at this point as well. And so everything we're doing is going to need to shift because of that. In spite of all that transformation, at the same time, recently LinkedIn put out some research, and they said 64% of of professionals that they feel overwhelmed by the rapid pace of workplace change. 68% are seeking more support because they can't keep up with these landscape shifts, and half of the workers are worried about being left behind as this new frontier approaches us. There was actually our CEO, Johnny C. Taylor. He spoke today to all the employees, and he talked about a quote he heard while he was in Ghana last week, and it went something like this: that when the pace of change externally is moving faster than the pace of change internally within the organization, that organization is in trouble. And I was like, man, what a great line for where we're at in this AI transformation. Organizations that can adapt and move at least the same pace of change that the technology is moving in is going to be in a competitively different position than their counterparts. And so I think it's our job, any of us that are responsible for HR, for the human resources inside the company, to make sure that we are the conduit that is really kind of setting the pace of that change.
I love that. And it's reminding me, George, when earlier in this year, we surveyed our community and there was a huge response wanting more upskilling. And one of the, of course, primary things they were looking for upskilling in was AI. So I think you very much see that across the board, really that need to move. And I love Johnny's quote there because I think it really kind of speaks to what so many of us are experiencing right now, where this outside world is sometimes moving fast. Are we keeping up? There's a lot of anxiety around that. So I think I'm going to definitely be keeping that in mind. And love to kind of dive deeper into with AI evolving so rapidly. I mean, every day you go and there's something new with it. What are some of the effective ways companies can upskill their workforce to keep pace with technological advancements while maintaining that inclusive environment? Because we don't want to also burn people out or have them feel, oh my gosh, I'm not keeping up. It can be that keeping up with the Joneses kind of feel. So what should companies be doing to upskill while keeping in mind that inclusive environment?
Yeah, really great question. I mean, that's it, right? That's really at the core of what we've been thinking about here at SHRM. If you all follow us, I, by the way, appreciate these research credits. Love that we're getting the research. Raise your hand, throw an emoji up if you're certified. Yeah, love it. Thank you, thank you. And so look, if you've been following SHRM, thank you, Amber. If you've been following SHRM, you may have seen some either commercials or an event we have called AI plus HI. What we mean by that is artificial intelligence plus human intelligence, right? Or what my colleague, Dr. Alexander Alonso, says, human ingenuity, and that AI plus HI formula equals ROI. And so we truly believe that like our core mission when it comes to the next phase of what the work world is that human intuition, innovation, that human intelligence has to be core at everything with everything that AI is doing within the organization. So a strong culture focused on inclusivity and personal growth and development is certainly highly important. And when you think about the change that the humans are going to have to go through, HR is really in the middle of all of those, or should be in the middle of all of those conversations. And so, number one, what we believe is that HR definitely has to have a seat at the table in any implementation of AI tools, and not just a seat giving their opinion on change management, right? But truly, what is this tool going to do within our organization? How is it going to affect our employees? What is the roadmap of the productivity of this tool? And then how do we make sure that our workforce is ready for tomorrow, right? Because when you think about upskilling and reskilling, or in some cases, outskilling your people, that is so core to what HR is responsible for. And so it's not about just making sure they're ready to adopt the change today, but making sure that we truly have a personnel development roadmap that is going to get them ready for the work world of tomorrow. Hopefully that's within the organization, but in some cases that might be outside of the organization. But either way, making sure your employees feel really cared for, whether that end goal is for them to stay within the organization or get upskilled out of the organization, that feeling of knowing that they're being cared for is what's going to prevent that burnout. That fear that I'm going to get displaced, that feeling of not belonging, like I'm only here, I'm on rented time. Those are the things that really will creep into our employees' minds and really change the dynamic of what that workplace feels like. And if you lose your culture now in this transition period, you've lost the race, because you've lost so much of that human ingenuity, that human intelligence that you need to actually make AI work. And look, our research shows that 78% of HR officials, I keep saying officials, HR is very official, but HR professionals don't have any organizational policies around generative AI systems yet, right? And so to me, that's the next piece of keeping this thing inclusive, is making sure that we've created some guide rails, that the way we use AI within our organization is in alignment with our culture. One of the things we tell companies here all the time in the work that we do in enterprise solutions working with companies is there is no such thing as a bad culture. There's immoral cultures. There's cultures that are illegal. Those are different. But when it comes to the spectrum of cultures, there is no good or bad. Every organization is allowed to design the culture that works for them and works for their business goals. But with that said, right, that means in order for that to work, you have to live it in everything you do. And so a huge change like implementing AI technologies in your organization, it has to fall within the ethos of your culture. And if you haven't, as HR leaders, had that conversation of what our organizational cultural view is on AI and how we want to deploy it and how we want to care for employees in that process, then that's the first step that really needs to occur.
Thank you so much, George, because there was so much to unpack there. And I think what I hear in many other events that we've done around this topic is people have just started using tools, and then there's a backlash. And I love the idea of including the human resources team from the very beginning to kind of assess these tools to see what the human impact is. And it even reminds me of the question I used to kind of start this all off that we hear all the time, where is a human looking at this? And I think at the core, even as we bring in AI into all these different tasks, there always needs to be a human at the core of something, whether it is also human resources or just a human. And I would say to anyone on the line, if you're not in HR, but you might be in an ERG, for example, like start to talk with your other members of that ERG and say, oh, how is AI affecting us as well? So I love that. And my next question for you is, what are some of the biggest ethical challenges organizations face when integrating AI, particularly in HR and in inclusion and diversity? I mentioned this kind of at the top, that this is kind of a murky area that a lot of people are still kind of wading into. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to Murky. I was going to say it's a complex issue here, right? There's a lot of different ways to look at it. I'll give you a couple to maybe consider. We'll see if I remember them all. But I would say step one, though, is this is another call out for why HR has to be in this decision-making process within the organization. So for any of you that are in HR, if you feel like this is an IT decision or a CFO decision about cost reduction or something, we're thinking about it wrong, because we have to be in the middle of this decision-making process for the reasons you just stated, right? For inclusion reasons, for that change management piece. As HR is at the table, HR is going to be asking kind of the relevant questions that no one else in the organization is going to be thinking about. Things like, what is the training process going to need to be for the employees that are going to use this tool? What is the job scoping that will go around this as this tool continues to learn and evolve in the pace in which AI is evolving? Where will this job transition to over the next several years? What's the business impact of deploying this tool? What's the human and business impact? And then, of course, probably the biggest one that you'll see on the news a lot is just what are the biases that might exist within the tool? And so, we have a Wharton professor that speaks at some of our events. We do something called CEO Academy. It's a development program for newer CEOs. And one of the things that he says when he speaks there, I love it. He goes, remember this. The model of AI or generative AI that you're leveraging right now is the dumbest version of AI that you will ever interact with. And I just love that line so much because he's absolutely right. Like this is wherever we're at today, we'll look back 2, 3, 5 years from now and say, wow, that was so silly how long it took to generate that answer, or how it didn't understand contextual inputs of where we work or how we work or what our culture is or all these other things. And so that level of personalization is really on its way, which also means since we are at the dumbest version of AI that we'll ever have, that also means that we probably have the most biased version of AI that we'll ever have. We have the most hallucination-prone version of AI that we'll ever have. We have the most likely to put itself in a compromising situation in the advice that it gives maybe one of your employees that we'll ever have. And so there's just the risk that goes along with that, and we should be really, really aware. The other thing that I think is really important is just understanding that HR has such a unique view on inclusivity organization-wide. So if an organization is trying to make these decisions without HR being deeply involved in this, they're missing the perspective of all the intricacies of the humans that are going to be working with this tool. And so to me, that is probably one of the biggest risks as these technologies get deployed. If HR isn't there to ask those really important questions, we're going to put ourselves in a situation where we add undue risk to the company. And again, I think the outcome is going to be cultural misalignment with the tools that we're using and how we're caring for the employees, which is going to create upset employees, and it's going to send people packing. The last thing I'll say is when you think about the vendor selection process, there's a lot of opportunity that goes into that, right? And so making sure you have diverse and representative vendors in any of the tools that you're exploring. It's really easy. What I've noticed right now with some of the companies we're working with, the first AI vendor that comes in and has a good story, or maybe they already have a relationship with, tends to be the winner because they're not putting the same due diligence in their vendor selection process for these new emerging tools because they just feel so new and they don't know what to ask yet. And I would encourage any of you that are part of the vendor selection process, just think back with any other tool that you were bringing on, and what was that process? How many different organizations did you have pitch for your RFP? And go through that same vendor selection process. It's really going to help you to weed out some of the. I love that Gartner line about the fact from fiction. It's going to help you weed out some of the fact from fiction. It's also going to make sure that you have a diverse sample set so you can make the right decision for your organization.
I love all of that, and it's such great advice. I think it's everything. It kind of goes back to the previous question of everything's moving so fast. I think sometimes people go, I got to get the first vendor that jumps out at me. But as you're saying, yeah, you really do need to take this process just as everything. And so much of what you're saying, it's like it's all coming back to that human touch as well. And I'm seeing some folks mention that in the chat. So great to hear all your comments there. And we're going to move into our roundtable breakout rooms in just 1 second, but I have one final question for you, George, which is if you are in HR today, and I also kind of throw that out to everyone who might be in DEI, or maybe you're leading an ERG or any of those kind of groups, and you're really interested in the strategy of AI, what should you be doing to impact your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've put a lot of thinking into this, and we have developed a program for this. It's an executive education program around implementing AI within your organization. We call it the AI plus HI program or enablement program. But really, the whole framework breaks down into these 5 categories. Number 1 is empower. Get everyone within your organization to learn about AI and what it is and what it isn't. Pillar number 2 is steward. HR needs to know and understand the ethical considerations and continue to safeguard against those threats. Number 3 is explore. It's, again, dumbest version we'll ever have is right now. And so people have to play with it. And so really creating a culture within your organization, which people feel empowered to go and explore within safe realms, right, of personally identifiable information and your IP that you don't want to get out there, but allow them to explore and create that culture of innovation. Number 4 is to activate, is to find ways to scale throughout the business, and for HR to start finding ways to document, map, and provide the learning to those jobs who will be shifting and transitioning. And then lastly, but kind of a wrapper around the whole thing, is just the change management and communication, making sure that there's a plan every step of the way so your employees feel really heard and understood and safe as they go through probably the largest technological transition that they've ever had in their working career. I mean, if you think about it right now, we have 5 different generations in the workforce. And, as the alphas, as the double A's enter into the workforce, actually this year they turn 15 and 16, which means you now have just such a wide range of humans in this workforce. And so it's imperative that when we think about change management, we think about it from a lens of a generation that has had nothing but technology in their hands, generations that have kind of been split, my world, right? Those of us that grew up without a lot of the technology, but then it all kind of came to us in our later adolescence or early adulthood, and then that generation that has that never grew up with these things and now is really facing their 3rd big industrial technology shift, right? First the PC, followed by mobile, and now this. Who may be change fatigued and may feel like they don't have enough runway to want to learn the new technology. But as we are having less children in this country and in almost all countries, and as the living age is growing, people are going to have to work longer and longer. And so the retirement standard old standard of 65 years old is going by the wayside. And so we will have people in our workforces in their 70s and 80s. And so making sure that we consider all of those different generations as we think through those 5 pillars of empower, steward, explore, activate, and then the change management and communication that goes around it all. So if you're interested in learning more, would love to talk to you more about it, because we're really proud of making sure that we have empowered, that we've built a program to empower HR to really lead the charge and be the catalyst that brings the change of AI into their organization.
Well, thank you so much, George. And I love empower because that was one of the words we were really getting from the previous session as well. And innovate, because that's in the title for today's summit. So I think it really speaks there. And on the multi-generational workforces, we actually have an upcoming talk on that is also SHRM eligible. So I just put that in there into the chat so people can check that out. And Katie was asking, is there a course that that folks could take? I'd imagine like they can go to SHRM's website and see all the great resources that you have. We've also had many different events on that subject, but should Katie or whoever else is interested check out your website to see those kind of courses?
Yeah, absolutely. Reach out. So we do have an AI specialty credential now. That's more for an individual that just wants to upskill their knowledge around HR. We also have the executive development program that's really organizationally focused, where you really walk through a full, almost year-long program and end up with a full playbook of what you need to do to empower your organization through the AI transition. That you won't see on the website yet because we haven't started to market it. But if you want to learn more, you can reach out to me, George at SHRM.org. Or if you just want to keep in touch, hit me up on LinkedIn. Love chatting with people and just having this conversation, because at the end of the day, for me, work is where life really gets done. And so I think there's so much opportunity to impact people and grow and learn that happens in the workplace in what should be a really safe and fun environment. And so I think if we do work right, we can really help people a lot. And I'm really committed to having those conversations and making sure that we create things that help HR lead that charge. So would love to stay in touch.
I love it. And speaking of keeping the conversation going, we're going to move into our breakout rooms now. This is the time that we really want to be able to hear from you. So you can turn off your microphone. Some of you will be in a breakout room with me, and then the really lucky ones are going to be in a breakout room with our head of sales, Christina Duke, as well. So Isa, you can do your thing, and you should be automatically moved. If you're not, you can select which room you should be in. Hello, 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 everyone. Folks are still returning to the main stage. Thank you so much. I see everyone populating. We were having some great conversations in our room. So I hope you learned a lot about, overcoming some of those fears, kind of jumping in. One of the great takeaways we heard from our room was you're not going to break AI. So, or in fact, you should try to break it, right?